I'm not the kind of person who goes looking for ghosts. I work the kind of jobs that start before the sun, where you carry heavy cases and keep your mouth shut so the neighbors don't complain. I'm a freelance grip in New York, which is a fancy way of saying I move stands and lights for shoots. You get weird locations sometimes, rooftops, basements. One time a bakery at 3 in the morning. Last winter, a producer I liked asked if I could take a dawn unit into Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn for a sunrise pickup. Just a couple of plates of fog over the hills, some pretty B-roll on Battle Hill. Quick in and quick out with a permit. The client was a travel show. I said yes because the rate was decent and I live 15 minutes away. It was one of those nights that never fully got dark. The city sky held a bruise of light from the expressway and the harbor. A damp wind came up from the south, carrying the smell of wet leaves and old iron. I met Jenna, our production assistant, at the Gothic gate on 5th Avenue just after 4. If you've never seen that gate in person, it looks like a church split into lace, all that stone cut into spikes and arches. There were no parakeets chattering in the nests because it was still night. The street was empty except for a bakery truck idling a block down and a guy walking a pit mix in a puffer jacket. The dog refused to come anywhere near the gate. It dug its front paws onto the sidewalk and leaned backwards like someone was pulling on its leash from inside. Jenna had the envelope with the permit and a key to the service door. She was 30, wiry, with a Yankees cap pulled low and a laminated lanyard that held more keys than I've owned in my life. She looked tired but excited. "Sun's at 6:58, she said, checking her phone. We get in. We get the shot over the hill to the harbor, maybe some mausoleum angles, and we're out by 8. Malik's bringing the small LED kit and the mics in a minute. Malik showed up in a rideshare with 2 milk crates stacked with gear and a thermos the size of a baseball bat. He's taller than me by a head and has a laugh that bounces off walls. I've known him for 5 years. He takes care of people. He handed me a black coffee and clapped my shoulder like this was just another dumb job. "I'm telling you," he said as Jenna worked the service door, "cemeteries at night are peaceful. I used to cut through a graveyard in Jersey to get to my aunt's place. Never bothered me." "I'm not bothered," I said. I was lying a little. Not scared exactly, just aware. Greenwood's a small city. You can feel it breathe when you step inside. Old trees, old stone, the ground rising and falling like waves frozen mid-swell. There are roads and footpaths that twist back on themselves, and it's easy to get turned around if you're not paying attention. Even in daylight, I've ended up somewhere different than I meant to be. Jenna opened the door and we slipped through. She relocked it behind us out of habit. The road inside ran black through the first patch of headstones, the names whitening and disappearing as our headlamps swept past. We weren't allowed to use big lights this early, so we kept things low and careful. Somewhere far off, a siren warbled and faded. The city was a sleeping animal turning over. The plan was Battle Hill first because the view of the harbor is clean from there, then down to a couple of old mausoleums Jenna had circled on the map. We rolled the little cart up the incline. The ground was soft from Tuesday's rain and the wheels jittered when they hit damp leaves. I remember the smell most of all. Wet stone and sweet rot and something like pennies. The kind of smell you get in an old church where the air has been breathed and breathed again for 100 years. We passed a caretaker's shed with the lights off. A rake leaned against the wall. A styrofoam cup sat on the window ledge, lip glossed with coffee. I thought of whoever would be working here in a few hours and felt a little guilty, the way you do when you're in someone's house before they wake up. Malik walked beside me, humming under his breath. Jenna walked a few steps ahead, checking the map, her flashlight scattering moths. Battle Hill is more of a hump than a hill, but when you get to the top, the ground lets you see. The harbor was a black dish with a dull scrape of metal across it as a barge moved. You could just make out the Statue of Liberty, a darker shape against the dark. We set the tripod near an old cannon. Jenna whispered, maybe because it felt wrong to speak normally. "Okay, wide, then a slow dolly by hand if we can keep it smooth. No sliders on stones." I adjusted the head while Malik fished out a cloth to wipe dew from the lens. He cursed softly and held the cloth up. "Smell that?" It did smell odd. Not the damp we'd been walking through. Something like a church after a service. That heavy warmth left from 100 bodies and 100 breaths, with a thread of candle smoke. We were outside. There were no candles. I told myself it was my own brain adding scent to the setting. We rolled a minute of harbor, then a minute more because the clouds shifted and showed a slice of silver toward Bay Ridge. We packed the camera to move down when I realized I was hearing something underneath the wind. Not a sound you notice and say a word about, more a change in the shape of the quiet. It was like being in a hallway with rooms on either side and people in those rooms having their own conversations, all blended into a soft, uneven hush. It rose a little and fell a little. I figured it was the highway's distant rush coming in waves, but it didn't have that engine sound. It had the cadence of voices. Jenna heard it too. I saw the angle of her head change and her shoulders pull tight. She didn't say anything right away. She looked at me and then at Malik. He made the face he makes when he's about to crack a joke and then thought better of it. Wind through trees, I said, because saying a thing like that makes it more likely to be true. Sure, Jenna said. Let's get the mausoleums. We walked down and the sound came with us. Not louder, not closer, just there. The way a sea is there when you stand with your back turned to it. We started running audio on the second location because it was on the call sheet, but also because Malik wanted to see if the mics would pick up the ambient and give the editor something nice to lay under the shot. He clipped a recorder to his belt and kept a lav in his hand like a little totem. He's a sound guy when he isn't swinging lights, and he has a collector's love for small machines. The mausoleums were black mouths cut into the slope. You don't need your imagination to work hard in a place like that. The names above the doors were old families, some carved deep, some softened by weather into suggestion. We set up a slow push past 3 of them, just the camera riding the cart while one of us guided a wheel so it wouldn't snag. A shot they call a poor man's dolly. I walked alongside with my hand on the tripod leg. Jenna kept the head level. Malik walked a few steps back in case we tripped and the whole rig went down. We had almost cleared the third one when the hush under the wind rose and untangled, as if the rooms on either side of that long hall had opened their doors at once. It wasn't a crowd sound anymore. It was whispers. Dozens. The words were too soft to catch, but the tone was unmistakable. People leaned in when they whispered. People angled their mouths toward you. That's what it felt like warm air directed at the skin over your ear. Okay, Jenna said too loudly. We got it. We stopped moving. I put one hand on the cart handle. I don't know why, because the cart wasn't going anywhere. Malik lifted the lav like it weighed more and the cord dragged against his wrist. He swallowed and the lav picked that up. A click in my earphones like a footstep on gravel. We should keep rolling, he said, and his voice was normal. If there are voices, the client might want that. Brooklyn vibes or whatever. No one laughed. The whispers rose again and fell. The wind swirled dry leaves into a small circle that moved 10 feet and vanished against a headstone. I found myself scanning the slope for a cluster of people, kids messing around, someone with a Bluetooth speaker playing white noise to freak us out. There was no one. Battle Hill stories, Jenna said softly, eyes on the path. A gaffer I worked with grew up in Sunset Park. He said his cousin knew a guy who used to take shortcuts through here after shifts. He swore the hill had a church in it sometimes at night. Not a church you can see. A church that keeps breathing when the door's closed. They said his cousin's friend heard his name once. That's when he quit, that guy. He left his keys in the gate and walked home. Never went back. You said it like a story you don't believe, Malik said. I don't, Jenna said quickly. It's just a story. We moved on because that's what you do when you have a schedule. You keep your head down and check shots off the list. The third location was a row of older stones that didn't have names anymore. The script supervisor had called them unmarked, but that's not right. They were marked once. The marks had just been abraded down to shadows of letters. The ground there dipped and made a shallow bowl. Oaks crowded the path and knitted their branches over the dip, turning it into a dim room inside the larger dim. The wind dropped when we stepped in, like walking into a closet and pulling the door almost shut. The hush went with the wind. The whispers didn't, they kept moving. They moved around us. I felt something then that I have tried hard to describe and always fail. It wasn't a touch. It wasn't cold. It wasn't anything dramatic enough to hang a story on. It was a change in pressure. The way you feel a subway car when it enters the station before you hear it. A pocket of air that notices you back. Malik lifted the recorder again and shook his head a little. Check this out, he whispered. It's peaking like there's a hiss. Levels are dancing. Maybe interference, I muttered. From what? He said and held the little screen toward me. The bars jumped like laughter. We didn't say anything more for a minute. We just did our job. I framed the stones and nudged the cart while Jenna rode the head. We ran the shot twice. The second time, right at the end, something said my name. I didn't mishear it. It wasn't a trick of wind. It was my name in the low, soft register my mother used when she was in a room with other people and wanted only me to hear her. Just 2 syllables. No elaboration. No come here or listen or run. My name. The way it sounds when you've only had it a second and no one else in the world knows it yet. My hands went off the cart like someone had put fire under the handle. Jenna turned. Malik stopped walking and the little recorder swung and thumped his chest and he flinched like he had been hit. I didn't say I heard it. I didn't have to. They could read my face. Malik's expression went empty in a way I've only seen a couple of times, like someone had drawn a hand across a foggy window and left no streaks. What did you hear? Jenna said. Not a question. A line. My name. I said. Jenna's eyes cut down the slope toward the nearest path and then up the slope toward the gate we couldn't see from here. Okay, she said slowly like she was soothing a skittish dog. We're done down here. We can do the last plate by the chapel. It's closer to the exit. We have enough. The whispers pressed in again. You know how a room sounds when everyone is waiting for a speaker to begin. That moment after the last throat clearing and before the first word. This felt like that. You could feel the air holding a shape for a voice that hadn't arrived yet. I wanted to move without looking like I was moving. I wanted to be outside that little bowl of trees. I could clock the exact angle that would take me to the path, the way I do when moving a stand through a tight little restaurant set. We didn't run. We walked. The cart's front left wheel found a groove and rattled like a small animal in a trap. The whispers surged, and a dozen of them pulled from the wash with a wet rope sound, as if they were shedding water, and twisted into 3. The 3 weren't one voice, but they were aligned like they belonged to the same sentence. Each one said a name. Malik stopped again. His hand, the one holding the lav, dropped to his side and then rose to his chest and flattened there, like he was patting to make sure his heart was still inside. That was me, he said. I heard my name. Jenna made a sound that was almost a laugh and not a laugh. Great, she said. We're 2/3 of the way to a hat trick. Let's keep moving. What if it knows us? Malik asked, voice strangled small, not a tone I had heard from him. What if it knows us the way a place knows the people who keep coming back? I haven't been here since a field trip in 4th grade, Jenna said. You haven't either. It doesn't know us. It's a draft in a weird bowl with messed up acoustics. We're almost to the path. I kept my eyes on the patch of lighter gray that meant the path. The cart bumped onto it and I didn't wait for Malik to get a hand on it to help. I rolled hard and fast, trying and failing to keep my speed from showing in my shoulders. We made the turn toward the chapel and then toward the service door. The whispers faded like a neighbor's radio when they switched to a station with bad reception. The air unpressed. It was like stepping out of a crowd and realizing you had been walking hunched and you straightened without thinking. We didn't speak for 100 yards. Then, because we are who we are and because there was still a job, Jenna said, chapel plate from the walkway. 10 seconds. We're done. We set it up quick, no dolly, just a still shot through bare branches, the small white building a ghost of itself in the blue hour. I don't remember if it was good. I don't care. We started for the gate. Jenna took her lanyard out from under her jacket without being told. The gate was locked. Of course it was locked. She had locked it when we came in. That wasn't the problem. The problem was the key. She slid it into the cylinder and turned, and it didn't turn. She tried again, slower. She wiped the key on her jacket and tried again. The key slid in like it belonged there, turned a hair and stopped as if a second hand had met it from the other side and pressed back. I locked it, she said softly. It's the same key. Maybe you double-turned and set a deadbolt, Malik said. Some doors, it's not that kind, she said, no temper in her voice. Just certainty. We stared at the inch of metal and at her hand and at the black shape of the cemetery on our side and the wet black street on the other side and all the empty space of early morning between. The whispers were gone. The silence pressed in like cotton in the ears. Try the other key, I said. She didn't have another key, but it was the kind of thing you say to make a second appear in a pocket. She shook her head. I took the key and tried it because that is what men do. It didn't turn for me either. I looked down at my hand and saw that my fingers were white around the brass, the grooves bitten into my skin. I loosened my grip and the key hummed a fraction, a vibration that traveled into my knuckles like a phone on silent. I would be lying if I said I didn't feel stupid. You don't want to be the person in a story who says a gate won't open because of whispers. You want to be the person who says the cylinder was cold welded or the pins were scored, or the angle was off because the door frame swelled in humidity. The air was damp, but not that damp. The frame didn't look warped. The key had worked an hour before. Call, Malik said, and we all pulled our phones because we are city people, and when a thing does not yield, you call a person. We had bars. We had battery. Jenna called the office number on the permit. It rang and rang in a bright, cheerful way that didn't belong here. No one picked up. She started to leave a message and the voicemail beep cut in and distorted into a flat tone that made her wince and pull the phone away from her ear. She looked at the screen. It still said leave a message. She hung up and called the emergency number for the cemetery printed on a small line on the bottom of the permit. It went straight to voicemail. Someone coughed behind us. The sound was small and dry and exactly the sound a human throat makes when it is about to speak and wants to clear any rattle so the words come clean. Jenna's whole body gave a twitch like she was about to run in place. Malik turned so fast the lav cord slapped his jacket. I turned slower because some animal part of me believed that if I didn't pivot too fast, the thing I turned to face would be smaller than if I did. There was no one on the road. The trees made a dark net against a sky that was starting to pale, and in the net something moved. Not a person. Not a single thing. Not anything I could point to and say it was this or that. It was motion itself, as if the leaves shifted while the branches didn't, as if the shadows let go and were caught again. The cough came once more, and then a voice spoke in a tone like paper rubbed between fingers. It didn't come from a direction. It came from the shape of the place. Tell me, it said, and paused like the wind had to carry the next word from somewhere far. Tell me your names. No, Jenna said, and the word was a countertop you slam your hand on to stop a spill. No names. My mother had rules for me as a kid. Don't go with grown-ups you don't know. Don't tell a stranger your address. She would have added this one if we had lived across from a cemetery in Brooklyn. Don't tell the dark your name when it asks. Malik took 2 steps toward the gate without thinking, and the cart followed him because my hand was still on its handle. He put his palm flat against the cold iron at chest height, his fingers spread, and for a second I thought he was about to say his name like it had been pulled up and out of him on a line. Then he closed his mouth, hard enough that you could hear his teeth. He shook his head. He took his hand away from the iron. He set the recorder down on the top bar of the cart and reached up like he was going to knock on the door of a church. Jenna slid the key in again in one smooth movement. The cylinder didn't give. Her throat worked. She looked at me, and it wasn't a look for permission or ideas. It was the look people give each other when a thing is happening and you are both witnesses and neither of you will later claim you didn't see it. Let me try something, I said, and I don't know why I did what I did next. I leaned close to the seam of the door and the frame, and I put my mouth near the place where the key was, and I spoke very quietly. We're leaving, I said. We're not here for you. We're not here to take anything. We're leaving now. The breath I put into the crack came back warm as if someone had spoken into my mouth from the other side with the same timing. The key clicked as if a pin had fallen into place. Jenna froze, then turned. The cylinder turned. The door opened a hand's breadth, then a full hand, then enough for the cart to slip through if we angled it right. The air outside was no different. But drawing it over my teeth felt like I had been holding my breath too long and finally remembered how to inhale properly. We bumped the cart through and carried the cases because the wheel caught on the lip. Jenna pulled the door shut behind us and relocked it. She didn't test the key. She didn't look at the key. She slid it onto her lanyard and tucked the lanyard under her jacket, like making it disappear would keep the world in one piece. We moved fast without looking like we were moving fast, the way you do when a stray dog is watching you. The bakery truck down the block had gone. The man with the pit mix was nowhere. A bus sighed at the corner and trundled by almost empty. A woman in a fluorescent vest swept litter into a pan and didn't glance at us once. We loaded the crates into the rideshare and stood for a second on the curb, each of us waiting for the other to make the first normal sound. Jenna was the one who did it. I'm going to file the footage and tell production we got what we could, she said. I'm not coming back for any pickup. If they want the stones, they can find a day to do it with a ranger. I'm done with pre-dawn in there. Same, Malik said immediately. He reached for his recorder and then didn't. He let his hand fall, then changed his mind and took it out of the crate and tucked it into his jacket pocket like it was a child's hand. I'm going home, I didn't say anything. I was calculating the chance that what I had heard had been my brain making patterns out of noise. I was trying to be the person who takes the long way around and doesn't cut across the lawn of the answer everyone else has already chosen. I was thinking about how I'd put my mouth to that door seam and spoken into a place where dead air lives. I tried to sleep when I got home. My apartment looked different. Wrong in the way rooms look after you have been somewhere with a weight. I drank water from the tap and the water tasted metallic. My phone vibrated. It was a text from Malik, just a link to an audio file and a single line. Don't listen if you don't want to. I stared at the link for a long time. Then I put my phone face down and lay there with my eyes open until my eyelids hurt. At noon, I listened. It was the second take of the unmarked stones, the one where the bowl of trees held the air still. You could hear our footfalls scuffing leaves and the distant whisper of the highway and the small click of Malik's swallow. You could hear that warm crowd sound come in like a tide. You could hear 3 strands peel from it and braid. The file clipped a little when the whisper shaped my name. It wasn't my mother's voice on the recording. It wasn't any voice I could name. It was the shape of my name, as if someone had held it in their mouth and warmed it and let it go toward me. I deleted the file and emptied the trash and made sure it was gone. An hour later, while I was washing a mug, I heard my name again. Not from the phone, from the pipes in the wall behind the sink. The water shook in the mug. My name was in the shake. I didn't tell Jenna, I didn't tell Malik, I didn't want to be the reason they kept hearing it. People don't always catch things until you point them out. I worked 3 more jobs that week and tried to pretend text threads and load in calls. And a line producer yelling about parking passes were enough to fill a day so full that no names could fit. The following Monday, the producer sent out the Greenwood plates and the client wrote back a grateful email full of exclamation points. No notes, gorgeous, gorgeous, thanks team. I watched the cut on a private link because curiosity is stronger than fear under the right light. The sunrise looked like a bruise cooling. The chapel looked clean. Battle Hill looked exactly like any high ground with a view of a harbor looks. The sound mix was fine. No whispers, no hisses. Whatever Malik had captured didn't make the cut. Jenna didn't want to talk about it again. The only thing she ever said later on a different job in a Manhattan lobby that smelled like lemons was this: don't answer when a place asks who you are. A place already knows. Malik quit nights for a while. He took corporate day stuff in offices with glass walls and loud espresso machines. He sent me a voice note 2 months later at 3 in the morning. I was asleep and didn't play it until breakfast. His voice was steady. He said he had been dozing on his couch when someone knocked on his door. Very soft, a polite knock. He got up and looked through the peephole. No one. He waited and the knock came again. When he didn't answer, a whisper shaped his name and sent it through the wood the way cold sends itself through brick. He said he sat down in the kitchen and waited until dawn and listened to the refrigerator cycle on and off and thought about how sound moves in a building. I told him to come by if he wanted. He said he would rather not. I still walk past Greenwood on 5th sometimes because my errands go that way. I don't look in. I don't let my eyes ride the iron and the lace. If a chute takes me near the gate, I keep moving. One morning in spring, when the parakeets were awake and quarreling in the nests, I saw a grounds truck roll through the service door with 2 guys in reflective vests hanging off the back. One of them had a thermos jammed into the corner of the truck's bed, the size of Malik's. One had a ring of keys on his belt that knocked against the gate as he swung it closed. The sound was small and ordinary, the kind of sound you forget as you hear it. I crossed the street and waited for the light and stood there an extra beat because the wind came from the hill and hit my throat like breath. And I didn't want to meet it halfway. If you want a moral, I don't have one. I know there are people who go into graveyards with recorders on purpose and people who leave bowls of milk for whatever walks. And people who live across from the gate and sleep with their windows open. I won't tell you not to do any of that. I will tell you there are places that are rooms inside larger rooms. And sometimes the door of the inner room is almost closed. And sometimes it is almost open. If you are standing in the doorway when the air inside gathers itself and shapes a word, and the word happens to be the one you wake to in the morning when someone loves you, don't answer. Don't answer in any language you know. Don't answer in your head. Don't answer with the shape of your breath against a seam in a door. Names are strings. Those whispers had hands. When the wind is right and the traffic is wrong and the light over Brooklyn turns the color of something cooling, I catch myself turning my head toward the hill. It isn't the statue or the cannon or the little chapel I see first. It's the shallow bowl inside the oaks where the stones used to have names and maybe remember their own shapes anyway. I pretend that what I hear then is nothing but the sound of a city breathing in a different register. I pretend well enough to walk on. Sometimes, as I pass the gate, a whisper hisses my name the exact way you would say it in a crowded church when you want only one person to hear. I don't look back. I don't say a word. I keep my hands in my pockets and my eyes on the next block. I tell myself there are no keys in my palm, and I don't have a thermos cooling on a stone ledge behind me, and the city isn't holding its breath to listen to whether I will answer. I didn't go to Sleepy Hollow for the Headless Horseman like everyone else does. I grew up 20 minutes south in Yonkers, and the legend felt like something they wrapped around cider donuts every fall for tourists. I went because my cousin Manny was the night guard at the cemetery and told me, without a hint of the usual drama, that he'd seen a barefoot woman walk between the headstones near Washington Irving's grave and vanish like a breath on glass. He said when she stepped, the grass turned dark and wet, and when she was gone, the ground held a trail of damp, perfect footprints. He quit that night. He won't drive the parkway after sundown now. He won't even take the route that cuts by the old Dutch church. When Manny tells a story like that with no jokes, I pay attention. I run a small channel online where I interview locals about strange places. It's not big. We film with a Canon my friend Jess bought used and a mic that only works half the time. I told Jess and our audio guy Ben that we could probably pull a solid episode if Manny took us up to the cemetery and showed us where it happened. Manny said absolutely not. He said he would meet me in daylight at the Dunkin' on Broadway and point with his coffee cup from the parking lot, and that was as close as he'd get. We met on a Saturday in April when the lawns were still waking up that pale, sickly green. He looked rough. He was always clean-cut and squared away, but that morning his beard had patchy spots like he'd gotten distracted shaving, and he kept his left hand wrapped around the cup like he was hiding it. He told it straight. He said a little past 1 in the morning, he was doing his rounds on the path that runs along the slope toward the old section, with the family plots and ornate obelisks. He said the air felt wrong, colder near the ground, and he noticed this line through the grass that looked darker than the rest. He thought a sprinkler had burst, except the place doesn't run sprinklers overnight. He followed it up toward the Irving plot. That's where he saw her. Thin, white dress to her ankles, blown to one side like there was a breeze just for her. Barefoot, pale, with long dark hair that stayed smooth and straight even though the air was moving around her. He called out. She didn't turn her head. He said she didn't move like a person. She drifted, as if walking through slightly deeper water than he could see. He radioed Jim up by the gate, static. When he looked back, she wasn't there anymore, but the footprints were. He said he bent down and touched one, and the blades of grass pressed together like someone had just stepped off. The water soaked into his fingertip. He wiped it on his pants and walked away without turning around. He handed in his badge before daybreak. He held up his left hand and uncurled it. There was a faint white crescent scar along the pad of his middle finger. It was cold, he said. Like fridge cold, like condensation. I felt it climb my skin. Jess is skeptical about everything, which is part of why we keep her around. She asked if he thought it was a trespasser in a dress. Manny said it would have been easier to carry a person out than to carry that feeling home. It followed him, he said. He started waking up to damp footprints on the tile by his front door. His apartment is on the 3rd floor. The windows were closed. He said it stopped when he moved out of his place and back in with his mother for a while. And he counseled us in that exact word. Counseled not to spend time in the cemetery after dark. People think it's a Halloween theme park, he said. It's still a place where the dead outweigh the living. Jess asked for directions anyway. Manny drank his coffee and pointed past the trees. Irving's grave is easy, he said. You'll see the path, the family plot, the stone with the quill. Don't step off the gravel. If you feel the air change, leave. Then he left us there with the early traffic and the smell of Dunkin' bagels, and a feeling that hung low and chilly across the parking lot. Even though the sun was, out, we filmed the tourist-safe daytime shots first. There were families with strollers and older couples who had done the bus tour. The woman at the office told us we needed a permit to film, and when I said we were just doing photos for a class project, she gave me a look that said she'd heard that line before, and then let us be. The cemetery in daylight is not as grim as you think. It's beautiful, with hills that rise and fall like gentle waves, big old trees, mausoleums tucked into the slopes, and that slow river sound from the Sawmill Parkway. We found Washington Irving's grave by following a line of people who had that respectful, slightly excited hush you get near famous names. His stone is modest with a feather carved into it. Ben set the mic on a tripod and captured some ambience. Everyone was happy. It was one of those April afternoons where your fingers never get warm, but you're grateful to be outside. Ben got the bright idea to ask around in town for stories. We bounced between the coffee shop on Beekman and a pub off Broadway that had a chalkboard out front advertising a trivia night about the Horseman. A bartender named Nina told us the cemetery is worse in June when the evenings are warm, but the ground holds cold, and that is when people see things they would not admit to if they weren't on their second IPA. A guy at the bar with a gravelly voice said his uncle saw a lady in white by the north end near the brook, and she left dew prints on the hood of his car. He got rid of the car within a week. Nina rolled her eyes at him, but it didn't feel like a joke. The stories repeated. The dress, the bare feet, the wet marks that shouldn't be there, the way sound went dead like inside a foam-lined box. When we mentioned Manny's name, Nina nodded like she knew. She said he had the 1,000-yard stare for a month. We should have left it there. Good folklore, strong interviews. Insert some B-roll of the church and the bridge and call it a wrap. But April days are short and April nights get under your coat, and there is something about watching a hill turn to silhouette while you're standing at the edge of it that makes you want to prove you're not afraid of shapes. We went back through the gate at dusk. No one stopped us. The afternoon attendant had left and the replacement was late. Or maybe this is one of those places that isn't as guarded as it used to be. We kept to the gravel like Manny said. The light thinned. The wind came down from the ridge with a steady sound like someone whispering in the next room. Jess kept saying it was wind in the oaks. Ben kept tapping the mic, checking levels. I felt it first at my shins the way you feel cold tide water in summer when you walk too close to a harbor wall. My calves prickled. The air smelled like a basement. I looked down and watched fog slide along the ground where there hadn't been any a minute before. I told Jess. She brushed a hand in front of her knees and laughed because she could see her breath coming out in a thin ribbon, even though it was April, and we weren't that cold. The path ahead had gone darker than the sides, as if someone had laid a moist strip of felt down the center. That sound from the parkway faded, and the crows in the trees went quiet like someone pressed a button. Ben said, "Do you hear water?" He wasn't talking about the brook. This was closer. A soft sound like something dripping steadily into a bucket. We stepped toward the Irving plot because that was where this story lived. I told myself we were doing what Manny had done, collecting details to tell later. The family plot rose on a knoll ringed with chain. The last tourists had left. A train passed in the distance, its horn small and lonely. Jess zipped her jacket and stepped carefully around the chain. "Gravel," I said. Manny said stay on the gravel. "I'm on it," she said, and she was mostly. She stood just inside the edge where it had washed over the grass. We didn't bring flashlights because we weren't trying to be those people who poke into corners and call everything a ghost. Ben angled the camera to get the quill on the stone with the sky behind it, pink and purple and beautiful and wrong over all that marble. He panned down, tightened, and swore softly. "What?" I said. "Condensation on the lens," he said. He wiped it with his sleeve. The smear returned. He readjusted, checked the mic, checked the gimbal, wiped again. The fog laced back across the glass like breath. Jess said, "Look at my shoes." She wore black sneakers. The toes and sides had turned darker, soaked up to where the laces tied. She took a step, and where she lifted her foot the gravel glittered and then went dull, like someone had poured a glass of water into it and it disappeared all at once. "We need to go," I said, and I was surprised by how steady I sounded, because my heart had started hitting hard. Jess looked past me and said, "Do you see her?" She didn't take a step closer. She only pointed between two low stones where the slope drops, where the ground holds a shape of shadow that could be a woman or the suggestion of one. I saw the dress first. Not white like clean paper, white like something that had been rinsed and wrung and never quite dried. It hung straight. The hair was dark and smooth and didn't bounce or twitch with the wind. The head tilting slightly one way and then the other, like a bird considering you from a fence. The face wasn't visible. "It was the wrong light for faces, ma'am," I said, because I couldn't make my mouth say ghost. "We're leaving. We're sorry to bother you." She moved. It isn't fair to call it a step. It was that water movement Manny had tried to describe. The slow slide you see under the surface when someone pushes through a lake. She glided between the stones without changing her height. The grass under her darkened, dew bloomed. The air around my ears went quiet, so quiet that I could hear the muscle fibers in my jaw when I clenched and unclenched my teeth. There was a smell of river weeds, metallic and green. I said her again, softer, like maybe she was someone who needed courtesy. Ben whispered, "Keep rolling." And then, oh man, like he had just realized where we were in real terms, with real consequences. She stopped near the edge of the gravel, and that's when I saw her feet. Clean, bare, pale, wet. The nails looked clear. Her soles didn't crush the grass the way a human foot does. They pushed water into it. She did not lift her feet. She slid them. When she did raise one slightly, the grass sprang up under it with a sound I could hear. My breath fogged my cheeks. I stepped back. Jess did not. There was an expression on her face I didn't recognize, like being lost without panic. Ben muttered, "Jess, come on." But his voice sounded as if he were speaking into a folded towel. The woman inclined her head, and a small motion passed through the hair by her cheek. Not a breeze. Something like a hand behind a curtain. She wasn't looking at me. She was angled toward Jess. Her mouth moved, and it made no sound at first. Only the shape of it made my teeth ache. Then I heard it, not in the air, but in what felt like the bones along my ear. "Where?" she said, and it was so close I almost turned to see if someone had walked up behind me. "Where did I leave him?" Jess said, "Who?" "Where did I leave him?" the woman said again, and each word carried a tiny weight of water that seemed to fall through my clothes, cold along my ribs. Her dress darkened at the hem like she had stepped into a puddle. She rotated, not a step, just a slow slide of direction, and when she turned that way, the dew on the gravel formed into two bare prints leading down the hill, like she had been, and gone, and we were late to wherever she wanted us to follow. Ben reached for Jess. His hand passed through air that wavered like heat over asphalt, except it was cold, and he yanked back and shook out his fingers like he had studded them with pins. Jess's eyes were on the prints. People talk about trances. I always figured that was a melodramatic word, but she went distant in a way I knew even then I would have trouble describing. She took one step down off the gravel, and the sound that moved through the grass was a whisper of her name. Not from the woman. From the ground, as if the blades themselves pushed it out of their wet mouths. I grabbed her arm. The skin under my palm was wet, as if she had been standing in rain for an hour. "Jess," I said, "don't follow." My teeth chattered mid-sentence. I wasn't cold in the winter sense. I was cold like dive in too deep cold, the kind that clamps your chest and convinces your body it forgot how to breathe. Jess blinked and looked at me like I had interrupted something private. The woman stood at the foot of the slope. Her head tilted. A ripple ran through her dress, up and then down like fingers under fabric. "Where did I leave him?" she said again, and this time it had an ending to it that I understood as a period rather than a question. It wasn't a request. It was a ritual. I pictured a child, a bundle, a ring, a Bible. I pictured the old Dutch churchyard and the way the ground holds stories the same way it holds water after rain. I pictured someone driven off the road into the river years ago, someone who walked herself out and left something behind that mattered more than her own breathing. My throat locked against the wrong idea that what she lost was not an item or a person, but a space where a person was supposed to be. Ben's camera screen went perfectly black and then flashed back on. Not with the right image, but with a gray static that looked like rain on an old TV. He swore. The mic popped. The woman turned her face slightly toward that sound, and when she did, the wet prints reversed direction all at once, filling in back up the slope like ink running backward. It broke something in me. I don't know why that was the detail that did it. Maybe footprints are supposed to belong to time and not time to them. We left in a hurry that didn't look like panic because we didn't run. We walked steady, faster than conversation, the three of us keeping the gravel under our shoes because the idea of stepping off it felt like stepping off a cliff. The woman did not follow in the regular sense. She did not leave the hill. But the quiet followed. The air on my left ear pressed in. Jess's shoelace trailed water that clicked against the stones. We reached the main lane that curves toward the gate and found the iron closed and chained in a way I swear it hadn't been earlier. The little office was dark. I had the wild thought that we had slipped past the edges of the day in a way the world hadn't agreed to. Ben swore at the lock and then at himself, pulled up a map on his phone to check for another exit. The map loaded like a picture in a book. No blue dot, no movement. My phone screen wore a film like it had been in a pocket with a condensation bottle. "Over there," Jess said, and pointed to a service opening where a section of fence met a stone wall. We climbed the low portion, scrabbled, dropped hard on the other side, and didn't feel like we had left anything but our good manners back there. The second the wall fell between us and the graves, sound returned. I heard the tires on Broadway, somebody's radio, a dog bark from a backyard, a siren far off. The warmth of ordinary spring slid back under my jacket, shy and grateful. We didn't speak in the car. When Ben turned the key, the engine rolled over like a cough and then started. He flicked on the wipers even though the windshield was clear. The blades squealed dry across the glass and then, halfway through the third pass, left a streak of clean through a cloudy film that had not been there the second before. It looked like someone had breathed across the inside of the glass in long, steady exhale. At the corner of the fog were 5 small ovals, pressed and lifted. Not fingertips, really. Not a child's. But small. Ben swore and swatted at it with the back of his hand. It didn't smear. It dried on its own. We went back to the pub. Nina looked up and said, "You 3 look like you got caught in a sprinkler." Jess's hair had dark spots at the ends. Ben's jacket sleeves had darkened halfway up. My sneakers made that soft squish on the floor that makes people look down and then away. We told Nina we had gone up too late, and she said we were lucky it was April and not August. I asked why. She said in the hottest months, the wet clings longer. People bring it home. She asked if we were staying in town. I said no. She said good, and it didn't land like a joke then either. That night I dreamt of a corridor not in my building. It had that old school wax smell and the buzzing ceiling light that leaves a pool on the floor. At the end of it, there was a door open to the outside. The threshold had a line across it like tape. On one side, dry. On the other, a mirrored slickness that reflected me wrong. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing against the nightstand. It was Jess, 4 in the morning, whispering. Water ran steadily behind her, like a tap left on low. She said, "Don't hang up." She was in her apartment bathroom, sitting on the closed toilet lid with her feet pulled up, watching her shower curtain breathe in and out as if the tub were exhaling. She touched the curtain with the back of her hand and pulled away. "Wet," she said. "Not slippery, just wet, like it had been damp for hours." She had a towel under her door, but the hallway beyond it shone faintly the way a road does after light rain. She said her shoes left no marks. Ben texted in the morning to say that the audio was ruined in a way he couldn't explain. The files played, but they were under something like white noise, except the noise had a rhythm. Every 10 seconds there was a ragged inhale. Every 10 seconds there was a drop, like a bead of water falling into a full sink. He sent a clip. I played it in my kitchen with the phone on the counter and felt a cold line slide between 2 of my toes. For a week the world carried a film. It's a subtle thing, a kind of shallow shine along tile, a coolness where your wrist rests on your desk, your sleeve hem darkening on your forearm where it meets the table though your cup is dry. I woke to moisture beaded along the inside of my window, like we had all collectively forgotten and left winter alive in the corners. I started seeing single prints on the hallway floor outside my apartment. They would be there when I got home from work, 1 or 2 near the elevator. Not big enough to be a man's, not sharp enough to call the super. If I went back in for a paper towel, they would be gone by the time I came out. The damp, not even dark anymore. Just a memory of darker. The 5th morning, I saw one inside my front door. The lock had not turned. The chain had not moved. It had dried by the time I fetched my camera. Jess stopped answering calls for 2 days. When she finally picked up, she had that light, funny tone she uses when she's trying not to let something new into the room. She said she'd been staying at her sister's in White Plains. She said the bathroom problem was not just the curtain. She had showered and then pulled back the plastic and found 5 small ovals pressed high on the tile by the faucet, like someone had rested a hand there while watching the water go down. She said she scrubbed with a brush and then with a folded towel. The prints were not dirt. They were not oily. They were nothing by the time she looked back. But the towel stayed damp where it touched the tile for hours. She laughed and said it was probably the building sweating. I said buildings don't sweat in April. I told her to stay away from the cemetery for a while. She said that was easy. She said she didn't want to film for a bit anyway. 2 months later, in June, I ran into Nina at the farmer's market. She said Manny came by the pub one night to pick up his mother and parked under the big sycamore on Beekman. When he came out, the hood of his car wore a neat row of prints that started in the center and walked toward the edge near the wipers, and then they stopped. He didn't have a chamois in the trunk. He drove to the car wash and went through twice and told her the second pass felt like being underwater for a long time. And he kept the window cracked the whole ride home to hear the real night. I don't use the footage we shot that day. There isn't much of it anyway. What I have of the woman is nothing I can point to. It's a patch in the video where the pixels soften and run, and there is the suggestion of a figure where there should be only trees. When I freeze it, the screen fogs on its own for a second and clears. I tried to frame-by-frame Jess stepping down off the gravel and Ben shaking out his hand, and the frames stutter there, not glitching so much as resisting. If I play it with the sound up, I hear the steady drop and then, very close to the mic, an inhale that does not belong to any of us. After that, a voice, not recorded properly but pressed into the track like a thumb in wax. Where did I leave him? I can't prove you should hear it. If I point, people say they think they hear it too. If I sit alone in my kitchen with the lights off, I don't need the words. I know them the way you know your own name in someone else's mouth. I am writing this now because last week my mother asked why I went silent as I turned onto Route 9 at dusk. I told her I was listening to the radio. Truth is, I'd seen the line of the stone wall off to the right and the tops of the trees and felt the air drag cold along my shins. My windshield wore a faint cloud I could not wipe. The wipers cleared it for a second and then the haze returned. I pulled into a gas station that faces the hill from a little distance and sat there next to a man in a pickup eating a sandwich. I watched for a while. I saw nothing, but the night never warmed, and the dog in the back of the truck kept putting his nose to the air and whining at something at knee height no human could feel if they didn't know what to look for. People ask what I think she is. I don't think that's the right question. I think of Manny saying it followed him home, not like a person follows you, but like damp air follows the cold when you open a freezer. You bring the weather out into the kitchen and it sits on your skin and then it's gone. And the plate you put down there leaves a ring that proves it was real. I think of a woman walking and not finding what she lost, because what she lost might not be an object you can point at. I think of how water holds the shape of anything for a second, then forgets it. I think of how sometimes it remembers longer. I think of June nights when the heat holds a hand to your throat, and you see dark patches where there shouldn't be any. On the sidewalk, on the back step, on your own doormat if you're not careful about where you go and what you ask. I don't go up there after dark anymore. When people send messages to my channel asking for a Sleepy Hollow episode, I tell them I'm still doing interviews. They say the Headless Horseman is played out and ask for something real. I say the real thing isn't always something you can film. I keep Manny's number in my favorites and check in every few weeks. He started doing deliveries for an electrical supply company. He avoids that stretch of road. He told me the car wash helps when the hood fogs and that if you crack the windows as you drive by, the night doesn't get inside as much. He told me to keep a towel in the trunk. When I asked if that was for drying off the car, he said no. It's to put under your front door when you get home. It won't stop anything, he said, but it feels like a thing you can do. Sometimes, if I'm up late and the apartment is quiet in that way that hurts, I can hear it. The lightest tap of water in the pipes without anyone upstairs running a sink. The hallway outside smells faintly like the river. The green, metallic scent that rides low over the grass near the wall where the hill meets the air. I tell myself it's summer. I tell myself it's humidity. I tell myself a lot of things in a voice even I don't buy. Once in a while, on my way to throw out recycling, I pause by the elevator and look down. The tile there is matte gray. It holds marks well. I look because I would rather be the one to find them than have my neighbor call me over later and say, "Did you see this? Isn't that weird?" I look and sometimes there is nothing, and sometimes there is a shape that might be from a kid running in from rain, and sometimes it is a perfect oval, cool to the eye, drying even as I stare. I know if I step on it, my sock will get wet. I know if I don't, I will go back to my place and turn the lock and lean my forehead against the wood and listen. The easy part is telling yourself you don't believe in a woman in white who slides over wet grass. The hard part is understanding that belief has very little to do with what follows you home. I grew up on the edge of Buffalo, the kind of place where Halloween actually feels like a season. You step outside and the air smells like dead leaves and cold water, and you know somewhere, somebody's dragging a plastic skeleton across a porch to make it squeak. We were 17 that year, me, Tyler, and Mariah mostly, with a couple of others falling in and out of the plan because their parents said no, or they had to work the late shift at Wegmans. I had my dad's old denim jacket with a hole near the cuff that I kept picking at. Tyler had that beat-up Sabres hat he always wore, and Mariah had fingerless gloves because she said they made her look tough even though she was the one who jump-scared the easiest. We weren't out to do anything impressive. We wanted to spook ourselves. That was the whole goal. 17 is an age where you're still willing to be stupid on purpose. Forest Lawn Cemetery was the obvious choice. Everyone in Buffalo has some story about it. Beautiful in the day, historic and all that, but at night it becomes something else. There's Mirror Lake right in the middle, and if you go in the day you can see ducks skimming across it and old guys in long coats walking slowly like they're thinking heavy thoughts. There's also this marble angel near the water, one of those statues that looks too real. I'd seen it during daylight once with my aunt, and even then I felt like it might blink if I stared long enough. Tyler said he knew a way in, a gate that never quite latched. He'd snuck in before with his older cousin to fish a golf ball out of the creek on a dare. He also said he had a flashlight brighter than anything the security guards carried. We planned it like we were going on a mission. We met up at the Tim Hortons on Delaware, splitting a box of Timbits and trying to look casual because there were actual grown-ups around. Mariah had a little backpack with a folded blanket and a water bottle and a Sharpie for some reason. Tyler kept telling her to bring gloves because the iron fence had spikes, and she told him the fingerless ones were enough. Around 9, we started walking, cutting through quiet streets where the pumpkins were already going soft on porches. There was a sky the color of a bruise in a wind that picked up and died like someone, breathing on your ear just to mess with you. Tyler's shortcut took us behind a row of old houses with deep backyards, and out toward the stone wall that borders the cemetery on one side. Then the wall gave way to iron fence, black and glossy with those spear-like tips that make you feel like you shouldn't even brush against them. He led us along the edge where a side gate sat slightly misaligned. There was a chain looped through the middle bars but no lock on it. "See?" he whispered like we were already being watched. "Told you." We waited for a car to pass on the road and then Tyler eased the chain aside. It scraped metal on metal with this dry sound and we winced but no one shouted and no lights came up. One by one we slipped in, feet crunching on a scatter of pale gravel. I remember the smell right away. Wet leaves, something mineral like wet pennies. It's been years and I still catch it on random October nights and feel my stomach drop. Inside it didn't feel like the city anymore. The sounds were different. Even the wind sounded organized, moving in long, steady lines. The paths curve around the small hills and statues, and every tree looks like the silhouette someone would draw if you said tree, and they wanted to make it just a little menacing. Tyler had the flashlight, but he kept it low, aiming it at the ground in front of our shoes. The sky had that fuzzy halo from distant city lights, but the shadows were thick. We made dumb jokes because that's what you do when you're nervous. Mariah said if a zombie walked out and asked for a light, she'd give it to him and tell him to quit smoking. I said the zombie wouldn't need it because he'd be dead, and Tyler snapped that we were ruining the vibe. We kept walking. Mirror Lake is exactly what it sounds like, a stretch of still water that swallows sound. When we got near it, everything went quiet as if we'd just stepped into a room with a thick carpet. The water had a skin of fallen leaves, and here and there the moon caught a ripple and broke into silver shards. Mariah took out her phone for a picture and then put it away like she felt guilty. Tyler aimed the flashlight across the path and stopped it on the marble angel. I'd forgotten how human it looks. It isn't one of those frilly, blank-eyed things. It's simple. A young face. Hands lowered like it's telling you to calm down. The stone is so clean it almost glows. There was a rumor in our school that if you touched its hand on Halloween, you'd have a nightmare where you wake up standing in your own hallway and see yourself sleeping in bed. Another rumor said the angel used to hold a key. And if you saw it holding something, you should leave because that meant someone was about to be locked in. We were there for the first rumor, not the second. Tyler announced the dare like a camp counselor, said whoever touched the angel's hand and stood by the edge of the lake for 10 silent seconds was a legend. Mariah said that was stupid, but she said it softly, like she didn't want to wake anything up. I teased her and she told me I could go first if I wanted to be tough. I didn't, but I also didn't want to look scared. So I said fine and walked ahead, Tyler's light floating beside me. Getting closer made the statue worse somehow. You start seeing details you don't want. The tiny carved veins on the back of the hand, the hint of fingernails, a softness in the mouth like it's about to speak. The air by the lake was colder. I could see my breath. I put my fingers out and touched the angel's hand. Stone is supposed to be hard, obviously, but that wasn't the part that got me. The part that got me was the temperature. It wasn't cold like the air. It was the kind of cold that feels like your finger is being pulled through the surface of a frozen pond. Not wet, but almost. I counted 10 in my head like Tyler said, and around 6 I realized I couldn't hear Tyler or Mariah moving behind me. I couldn't hear anything at all. At 10 I let go and stepped back and the sounds came back. The little rustle of leaves, a drip somewhere in the trees. I tried to be casual about it. I said, "They're happy?" The word happy looked wrong, just sliding out of my mouth in that place. Tyler clapped. Mariah rolled her eyes like she wasn't impressed and said she was going to do it too, just to show me I wasn't special. She stepped forward. I moved aside to give her room and drifted toward the lake without thinking. The water was black. I could see our shapes like cutouts in it. I saw the angel's reflection too, but it looked a little taller somehow, stretched by the angle. Then something else took shape in the water, behind us, or I thought it did. A long, narrow shadow like a person in a coat. I blinked and it was just the trees. When Mariah touched the angel's hand, she flinched and laughed immediately after. That shaky laugh people do when they want you to know they're fine. Tyler was already getting his phone out to record his turn, which is so Tyler I can't even explain it. While we were arguing about whether using a phone ruined the point, a sound wandered across the lake. A quiet clink. Then another, a little closer. 2 pieces of metal bumping together. Not loud. We both turned because it didn't sound like something the night should make on its own. "There's a security guy," Tyler whispered, and cut the light. We stood still. The world got darker, but not completely. My eyes adjusted and my heart did that thing where it speeds up and then starts hitting a steady, insane pace. I could see the angel again as a pale shape, and beyond it the dark stripe of the path and the faint gleam of the gate we had entered through if I squinted. We waited for footsteps, a flashlight beam. Nothing. Just that drifting clink again, keys brushing against each other in a pocket or a hand. "I don't see anybody," Mariah said. "Let's go," I said. "I'm not getting busted for trespassing. My mom will kill me." We started back the way we came, hurrying but trying not to look like we were hurrying. Tyler whispered that if we saw light we should drop and act like stones. It would have been funny anywhere else. At the edge of the path I glanced back at the angel and saw, this is the part I keep second-guessing, the suggestion of a figure standing slightly behind it, just inside the reach of the trees. The height of a tall man, the long line of a coat. I could have convinced myself I made it up if not for the small sound that followed. As clear as glass, keys shifting in a hand. We didn't run until we saw the gate. I don't know why we checked it instead of just slipping out. Maybe it was automatic, to put our hands on the familiar thing, to let the anxiety release all at once. Tyler reached for the chain he'd looped aside. It wasn't hanging loose anymore. It was threaded through in a neat row, each link pulled tight. There was a lock on it too, a big old-fashioned thing. The kind you don't see much, the kind with a keyhole the shape of a mouth. "Did you do that?" I asked, because maybe Tyler was messing with us. He didn't answer. He pulled at the chain the way you pull at something that looks wrong, testing it like maybe it would give if you showed enough effort. It didn't move. He aimed the flashlight down without turning it on, as if the light itself was something we didn't want to summon. Mariah swore in this tiny whisper that didn't fit her at all. "Okay," Tyler said, breathing tight through his nose. "There are other gates. It's a big place. We'll go around." That made sense, and so I believed it. We weren't stuck. There's always another way out. We turned left and took the path that follows the fence line. It should have been easy. Forest lawn isn't a maze. It's a normal cemetery with curved drives and open grass. But walking that night, it didn't feel like the same place I'd seen in daylight. Trees leaned in the wrong directions. We'd hit intersections that didn't look familiar, and picked the option that tracked closest to the fence only to end up farther from it again. I kept one eye on the metal bars and the other on the ground so I didn't trip. Twice I felt like I saw the angel's white shape where it couldn't be, to our right when it should have been behind us. I didn't tell the others that part. I didn't want to be the one to say the place was rearranging itself. Somewhere behind us, that soft tap of keys again, like someone checking their pocket. Then soft steps that stopped when we did. It's amazing how quickly you can go from thinking something is a prank to feeling your body decide it isn't. I felt it in the way my shoulders moved without me telling them to, tightening toward my ears as if to protect my neck. Mariah reached back and grabbed the sleeve of my jacket without looking. Tyler kept talking, but it wasn't to us. He was saying okay, okay, okay under his breath like a metronome. We reached another gate after 5 minutes that felt like 20. This one led to a small footbridge across a stream that in the day must be pretty. The gate was chained too, the same kind of old lock. The metal looking dry and pitted as if it had been out there for ages. "Hold the light," Tyler said. I held the flashlight pointed down so it wouldn't throw a beam. Tyler tried the chain. It rattled with a dull, heavy sound and didn't move. "Where are the guards?" Mariah asked, and something about that question made everything worse. You'd think getting caught would be the worry. But right then, getting caught would have meant normal life coming back. We turned again, following the curve of the stream until we hit a fork, where 2 weeping willows dipped into the water. I kept glancing through the fence toward the street. Cars passed out there, distant and safe. We were still in our city, the same one with coffee shops and buses and corner stores and neighbors raking leaves across from ours. The distance between us and that world felt huge, like the fence wasn't metal anymore. It was an idea we had to climb out of. On the path ahead, something caught the weak ambient light, a pale edge in the air at our height. I didn't see it until the last second. Tyler did. He threw his arm out and I walked into it. A strand of something thin and metallic was strung between 2 bushes at shoulder level, so fine it was almost invisible. Tyler touched it with his fingertip and it sang, one high, ridiculous note like a tiny spoon hitting a glass. He flinched and it made the keys sound in the distance answer. We stepped under it and kept going, a little hunched now. The wind carried mist off the lake, just enough to make the path slick. I kept picturing my mom's face if I broke an arm. The sound of keys came and went like a small bird moving from branch to branch. At one point, in that half-heard space where you're not sure if you heard anything at all, I could have sworn I heard a voice whispering, not words, just the rhythm of someone saying something soothing and steady. It sounded like the angel's hands looked. After another 10 minutes that felt like an hour, we reached the front entrance, the big main gate, the one with the arch and the name. It was open. I almost sobbed from relief. The arch looked like the opening of a tunnel leading back to the real world. The road beyond it had regular streetlights. We took 3 steps forward and then the breeze shifted. A chain lay across the gap at knee height, both ends looped around the inner bars in quick, neat turns. It wasn't there a heartbeat before. I didn't see. Mariah started and stopped. This chain didn't have a lock. It didn't need one. It was tied in a way my brain didn't have any names for, a pattern that made me dizzy if I tried to follow it. "I can untie that," Tyler said, and he reached out. Before his fingers touched the metal, a sound came from right behind us, close enough that I felt it through my jacket more than I heard it. Keys. Not many. Just 2 or 3. The air behind my neck tightened. Tyler's hand drifted back like it was being pulled by a string. We didn't turn around. I know you're supposed to turn around at times like that, to show you're not scared or to prove it's not real. We didn't. We stepped backward as one person, hands out until the little chain brushed my knees. "I can climb it," Mariah said suddenly. "Screw it. I can climb it." Tyler didn't say no. He bent and made a stirrup with his hands and she put her foot in and went up. The fence looked taller from this angle. It always does. She got to the spikes and hesitated, her hood catching on one. I pictured her sleeve tearing, the spike grazing skin. She moved slow. I reached up, hands ready to spot her even though I couldn't have caught her if she fell. Behind us, keys touched keys again, lazy, patient. "Go," Tyler said when she swung her leg over. His voice cracked. She dropped to the other side, landing harder than she meant to with a small bark of pain that she tried to swallow. She looked pale even in the streetlight. We didn't even ask if she was okay. Tyler was already climbing. I held the chain down with my foot so it wouldn't shift and make a sound. He paused at the spikes to look back, of course he did, then turned and went over. I followed, because the part of me that didn't want to be last had grown louder than the part of me that feared getting caught on the spikes. At the top, my jacket snagged. It tugged me to a stop with a sound like teeth catching. For 1 second, I was stuck, legs straddling cold metal, chest pressed to the top bar, and in that second, with my face turned toward the cemetery, I finally looked. There was someone standing in the path 10 feet back, easy to see even without Tyler's flashlight. Tall, thin, the shape of a dark suit as clean as a shadow cut out of paper. The face, this is where I wish I could give you detail, the angle of a jaw, the blink of an eye. But there wasn't any detail. The distance between us was small, but the space where a face should be felt like a hole in the world. At the figure's side, a hand hung open. In it, a ring of keys rested, maybe 3 or 4. Not shiny new ones, but old ones, each a slightly different shape. The figure wasn't threatening. That might be the worst part. It stood like people stand when they're about to do something simple and polite, like close a door they think you forgot to close. The chain under my shoes lifted. Not much, just the smallest suggestion of movement, as if someone had touched one end with a finger. It grazed my jeans and made that tiny spoon-on-glass note. I kicked free, shredding the edge of my jacket on the spike, and dropped. I landed badly. Pain shot up my ankle and I felt something wet where the metal had bitten my calf. Tyler grabbed my arm and we ran. We didn't check to see if the chain behind us had fallen, or if the figure had moved to follow. We didn't look back at all. We ran down the street like idiots, past a jogger who turned his head to stare, past a guy in a red hoodie smoking under a streetlight who yelled something we didn't catch, past 2 girls in witch hats waiting for a rideshare who laughed because we probably looked like we were trying too hard. We ended up 3 blocks away, bent double behind a hedge by a dark brick building. The hurt in my leg felt distant, like a broken radio somewhere in another room. Tyler's hat was gone. Mariah's hands shook so hard she couldn't get her phone out of her pocket to check the time. We didn't say what we saw, not at first. We said the chain was tied weird, and we said we should have heard a guard if there was one, and we said we probably tripped an alarm and the staff was messing with us. We said everything except what we were actually thinking because none of us wanted to be the first one to say keys. When we finally walked back to the main road and caught our breath, we called for a ride. Tyler's cousin was supposed to pick us up, but the call dropped twice, and when it connected, he said all the lights on his dashboard had flickered off and then back on, and he wasn't driving anywhere for a bit. A bus came and we took it, sitting in a row like we'd run out of words. On the bus, an old man in a navy coat looked at my leg and asked if I'd had a run-in with a fence. I said it was a dog. He nodded like he'd expected me to lie. At home, I cleaned the cuts and told my mom I'd slipped on wet leaves behind the library. She gave me that look moms have and said to throw the jeans in the wash before the blood set. That night, I slept hard and dreamed of nothing. I wish I could say I had some dramatic hallucination that told me more than the world wanted me to know, but it was just blank. The next morning, being a school day, felt like a prank the universe pulls. We met up at lunch and didn't talk about it until Tyler couldn't help himself. He said, "I saw someone tall with, and Mariah said, keys, very quietly. We went back in daylight after school because that's what you do when something scares you. You go back and prove it was the night playing tricks. The cemetery is open to the public during the day, paths wide and clean, couples strolling. A tour group paused near a mausoleum, a groundskeeper in a bright jacket doing something with a rake. The lake was just a lake again, with ducks making irritated duck sounds. The angel looked like art. We walked past it and none of us touched it. When we got to the side gate where we'd slipped in, we braced ourselves to see the chain and the lock. There was no chain. There was no lock. The bars weren't even scraped like metal had been dragged across them. It was just a gate, slightly misaligned like any other. Tyler said maybe we had the wrong gate, which would have been a good theory if it didn't make my stomach feel like it was hitting a dip on the highway. We checked the footbridge gate. Nothing there either. We checked the main gate, feeling stupid for doing it in front of people as if we were going to find a magic trick laid out for daylight. It was open. No knee-high chain. No anything. The groundskeeper noticed us looking and asked if we were lost. Tyler decided to be brave and asked if they locked the gates at night with chains and old locks. The groundskeeper frowned like the question didn't make any sense. "We got normal locks," he said. "Nothing antique like that. And we don't chain it from the inside." "Why would we do that?" He nodded at my leg and said, "You should be careful around fences," in the exact same tone as the old man on the bus. The plan was to shrug it off and move on. You tell yourself a story. We scared ourselves, we misremembered, there was a guard with a weird sense of humor, who knows? The trouble is how your life keeps touching the thing you're trying to forget. That week, Tyler lost his house key. He's one of those dudes who never loses anything. He tore his room apart and accused his little brother and then apologized, and it never turned up. His mom got 2 new keys cut and the locksmith said the old one was probably in a jacket pocket, and Tyler said, "I checked every pocket I own." The next day, the front door was locked from the inside when they got back from dinner. Not just the deadbolt, but the chain too. No one had been home. They had to go around back and pry a window. The chain on the front door sat calm and straight in its bracket like it always had. Mariah's car locked itself at the gas station. I was there for that one. We got out to get a snack. She swore she had her keys in her hand, put them in the pocket of her fingerless gloves for a second, and somehow the car beeped and all 4 doors thunked down. The keys were on the front seat where she hadn't left them. A guy in a Bills jacket tried to help with a coat hanger, because there are always guys who want to help with coat hangers. And when the door finally popped, the alarm went off like a scream and kept going even after she started the engine. The gas station attendant leaned over the counter and said, "Happens," and we left it at that. As for me, I kept hearing things in my hallway at night. My house is old, and old houses pop and settle and knock their own pipes. This was different. This was a soft, irregular music, metal against metal in tiny touches, like someone was idly rotating a ring of keys and letting them kiss each other one by one. The first time I thought it was my dad coming home late and fumbling in his pocket for his office keys. I got up to tell him to be quiet because my mom had an early shift and the hallway was empty. The sound wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from halfway down the hall near the linen closet. I stood there barefoot in the cold and felt something like embarrassment crawl up my back, as if I'd interrupted someone I couldn't see doing a small, private thing. 2 weeks after Halloween, Tyler texted me at 2 a.m. a picture of his palm. He held a key on it. Not a modern house key. An old one, narrow with a round head and a long shaft and a simple rectangular tooth. "Found this in my jacket," he wrote. The denim one. I looked at the photo for a long time. The key looked dry. The kind of dry that belongs underground. "Maybe your mom had it?" I wrote. He said no. He said when he touched it he felt cold. The next morning he said the key was gone. He said he'd put it on his desk and it wasn't there anymore. I told him he probably moved it in his sleep, and he said, "You know I don't sleepwalk." We stopped talking about it out loud. Things that stay unspoken give you the illusion that you have control. But we kept orbiting Forest Lawn in our own ways. I found myself biking past it after school without turning my head, pretending I wasn't aware of how the iron fence ran beside me like a dark river. One afternoon when the sky was the color of steel and the last leaves were skittering like paper, I saw a funeral procession going in. There was a man in a dark suit at the gate with a ring of keys. He wasn't the same height. He wasn't standing the same way. He had a face tan and human and slightly bored. He held the keys and looked right through me like I was his own ghost. I had to stop my bike and breathe for a minute, hands on my knees while my heart felt out the edges of my ribs. We went once more in daylight, late November when the wind is meaner. I don't know what we thought we'd find. Proof that the gate really could be chained from the inside. A key on the ground? A set of footprints with shoe treads hollow and weird. We walked to the angel and stood a polite distance away. Someone had left a few pennies at its feet. I never noticed that before. People leaving coins like they do at fountains. Tyler said, "This is stupid." And I said, "Yeah." And Mariah said we should go, because clouds were piling up and the lake was darkening like a mood. We were leaving the path when a flashlight beam flashed across our shoes. We flinched and turned, and there was a security guard, or a man with a security guard's jacket, friendly enough. "You kids aren't getting into trouble, are you?" he asked, and he smiled like he meant the opposite of trouble. We said no. He asked if we knew they closed the gates at dusk, and we said yes, and he reminded us what time dusk was. Before he left, he reached into his pocket for something. Without thinking, all 3 of us stepped backward at once. He noticed. His smile changed the smallest bit, like a chord resolving. He took out a small notebook, not keys, and scribbled something. "Happy Thanksgiving," he said, and we said it back. And the whole time my heartbeat wrote the word keys across the inside of my chest like a pen that wouldn't run out. That winter, Buffalo got one of those lake effect storms that swallows everything. The city went quiet the way only snow can make it quiet. I stayed up late one night watching the world turn white out my window, and somewhere in the small hours I heard the sound again. Not in the hallway this time. Downstairs. A faint, careful chime, irregular and patient, like someone had all the time in the world to try different doors. I told myself it was the radiator, and I believed myself until it stopped, and the silence after it felt like a held breath. Sometimes now, years later, I'll be in a parking garage or a stairwell or a hotel hallway and I'll hear someone testing keys. You hear that sound all the time when you pay attention. Janitors, night staff, people who have to open places when no one's around. It makes my skin go cold. I check whatever door I'm near to see if the chain is on from the inside, which is silly because most places don't even have chains anymore. I went away for college and thought distance would make it faint. It didn't. I know what you want from me at the end of this. You want me to admit that we were kids who scared ourselves and that's it. And if I can't admit that, you want something solid. A photo of the chain tied in the way my brain can't map. A recording of the figure's footsteps. A close-up of the angel's stone hand holding something it never holds in the day. I don't have those to give. I have us climbing a fence, blood on my jeans, the smell of wet iron, the sound of keys in a night that had more than one way to close a gate. I have the way the main gate looked open one second and crossed with metal the next. I have a memory of a dark suit standing still as patience. I have Tyler's lost key that turned up and vanished. Mariah's car locking itself with the keys in plain sight. My hallway singing in an empty house. I haven't gone back at night. I say that like it's a decision I made, but it feels more like a decision that was made about me. Sometimes I walk past in daylight and the lake shines like a piece of the sky on the ground. People leave pennies at the angel's feet and nothing moves and the gate stands simple and open. No chain, no old lock with the mouth-shaped keyhole. If you go there on Halloween and you tell yourself it's a dare, please promise me one thing. If you hear keys where there shouldn't be keys, don't wait to see if they're for you. Don't wait to find out whether the person holding them is polite. Don't wait for anything to move, and if the gate is open, walk through it. If it's not, don't assume it was always closed. Chains aren't only for keeping things in. Sometimes they're there to teach you which side you belong on. Sometimes they look like nothing at all, until you're close enough to feel them lift under your shoes. I'm only writing this because the sound showed up again last night, and I'm tired of pretending I don't hear it. If I put it down the way it happened, maybe it will stop following me. That's what he thought too, and it didn't work for him, but I don't know what else to try. This started my sophomore year at SUNY Albany. I lived in a tired red brick dorm with the cinder block walls and the humming vents you can feel through your pillow. My roommate, Evan, was a quiet kid from Poughkeepsie who collected old field recorders and once spent an entire weekend cataloging the different fan noises on our hallway. He wasn't weird, not exactly. He just liked sound the way some people like birds. You'd be brushing your teeth and he'd come out of the room holding his phone like a divining rod and say, "Hear that? The water heater is dropping pitch. There's air in the line." It was late September, still warm in the afternoons, but at night there was that see-your-breath chill that makes you pull a hoodie tighter. On a Thursday, Evan came back after dark with dirt on his sneakers and a look I hadn't seen on him before, like he'd seen a car accident, wide-eyed and not entirely in the room. He set his backpack down gently like something was alive in it. "Don't get mad," he said. "I went out to Albany Rural. Why would I get mad about a cemetery?" I asked because this is college and people do weirder things. He zipped the bag open and took out his phone. "Because I went to the Crying Stone. The obelisk thing. It's real. There's a part of Albany everyone knows about, even if they've never gone. Old graveyard big as a small town. The kind of place where joggers cut through during the day and at night your brain plays tricks. The story is simple. There's a tall gray obelisk with a carved face at the base, and if you sit there at dusk and wait, you'll hear it cry. People say the face weeps when the air goes still. It's the kind of rumor that floats around dorms the same way ghost stories do anywhere someone's bored. Evan opened the voice memos app and handed me an earbud. "Just listen." The recording started with wind and birds and the distant hiss of traffic. Then it went quiet like a blanket pulled over the world. I waited, ready to roll my eyes when the next bus breathed by or a dog barked. What came instead was small and human, and did not belong in the empty space of that cemetery. Soft, broken sobs, like someone trying not to be heard in the next room. Not theatrical crying, not horror movie wailing, just someone lost in their own grief. Every hair on my arm stood up. I took the bud out and swore without meaning to. Okay, that's... Okay, keep going, Evan said. The sobbing faded. There was a pause. Then something else slid beneath it. So low I felt it more than heard it. Not a voice at first. A vibration that made the earbud tickle, like when a truck idles outside and the window rattles. It rose by degrees until it had the shape of words, but if there were words there, I didn't know the language. The sound didn't come from a throat. It came from stone. I pulled the earbud out. Dude, what is that? He looked over my shoulder, and for half a second I thought he was going to say someone followed him back. He swallowed and shook his head. I don't know. I deleted the second file, but this one, I can't make myself get rid of it. I tried. Every time I go to hit trash, my hand won't do it. Is that stupid? Let me delete it, I said, and he flinched. Just listen to the last part. I put the earbud back in. After the low sound, there was a scrape, fabric on stone maybe, and Evan whispered, too close to the mic, "Hello? Is someone here?" He didn't sound scared then, just polite. The sobbing stopped. The low sound didn't. It came up like a damp chill. It pressed in around the tiny microphone until all I could hear was the shape of that not language and my own heart in my ears. Then in a voice that was definitely human and definitely not Evan's, I heard my last name quickly, like a cough. The recording snapped into wind again and then ended. I took the earbud out very slowly. "You're messing with me," I said, but my mouth felt chalky. "You edited that?" "I swear to God I didn't, Mark, I didn't." He held up both hands. "I can play the raw file in the app. The metadata says it was recorded once, no cuts. I only had my phone." We both sat there listening to the vents. "Maybe it's a person," I offered. "Someone hiding. Or some creep." "That low thing wasn't a person," he said. "And I said your name once when I was telling the story under my breath." His voice dropped. What if it was just answering? We argued for a while about pipes under the hill and pranksters and the power of suggestion, the way two people will when neither wants to admit they're rattled. At some point we realized we were talking in whispers. Who whispers in their own room about their own phone? But we kept doing it without planning to. At 2 a.m, a sound woke me. Wet sniffling, quiet and desperate. I sat up and saw Evan turn toward the wall. I thought he was crying, and I felt a flood of guilty relief that this had all been normal grief after all. Then I realized the sound was coming from the vent above our door, riding the same low hum that had been there all night. It didn't sound like it traveled through ductwork. It sounded like it had been trapped in the metal. When I got up to the vent, it stopped. I tapped the grill like an idiot. The room went back to the steady hiss I'd never noticed until that week. In the morning, Evan looked like he hadn't slept at all. He asked me if I heard anything, and I told him no, because sometimes when someone is already sliding, you don't hand them a sled. He nodded and stared at his cereal like it would tell him what to do next. By Friday, everyone on our floor had plans. Mine was nothing, pizza, maybe a cheap movie, but I didn't go. After dinner, I found Evan at his desk with that look again, the one that didn't belong to the room. He had headphones on. He wasn't listening to music. "You're going back," I said. He nodded. "I need to know if it does it again. I'll go early." "It starts at dusk, right?" "I'll be out before we get locked in." "Then I'm going with you," I said, because saying don't would have only made him go alone. We asked Maya from down the hall if she wanted to come. Maya was the kind of friend who says whatever everyone else is thinking without the apology, and she already had her coat and keys before we explained. "If you two are going to stand in a haunted place and listen to crying, I'm not missing that," she said, grinning in a way that made it clear she didn't believe anything would happen, but was excited to watch us spook ourselves. We caught the bus out toward the cemetery. The air bit at my ears the second we stepped off. The light was still good, the kind of clear early evening that makes shadows crisp. The cemetery was huge, rolling hills and trees losing their leaves, old stones leaning into each other like drunks. We passed joggers and an older couple walking a dog that snorted and coughed like an old man. It felt wrong to be there with earbuds and phones out. It felt like bringing fast food to a church. Evan led us to the obelisk he'd talked about. It was taller than I expected, pale granite streaked dark in places with a stone face carved low at the base. Calm, almost blank, eyes closed. People had left pennies and a paper crane and a scarf that had been rained on and dried in that shape. The ground was beaten bare from feet. We didn't sit at first. We stood a few yards back and pretended we weren't waiting for something. A breeze kept moving through the maples and then not moving, like someone was playing with a dimmer switch on the day. I don't know when I noticed that all the other sounds had thinned out. No more joggers huffing, no more dog. Even the road noise faded until it was just the idea of it. Okay, Maya said after 10 minutes of nothing. I would like my refund. Just hold on, Evan said, too sharp. He had his phone out, the memo app open, thumb hovering like a trigger. The air changed the way it does right before rain, even though the sky was blue. I didn't feel temperature drop. I felt it leave, like someone took warmth out and forgot to replace it with anything. At first, it didn't sound like crying. It sounded like breath that had been held too long, coming out in slips. Then the small sounds found each other and turned into sobs, soft and careful, half swallowed every time they got too loud. I could tell Maya wanted to say something about a speaker hidden in the ground, but she didn't. She put 2 fingers in the neckline of her sweater like she was easing a necklace and said nothing at all. Evan hit record. His hand shook, and I'm not ashamed to say mine did too. "Hello?" he said, as if he were greeting a neighbor. The sobbing paused. The pause lasted long enough that I thought that was it, the end of our show. Then from somewhere that felt below us, like the hill had a throat, something answered. The sound rose so gently it might have been there all along. Only now we felt safe enough to hear it. It had the shape of speech without the mercy of meaning. It tightened the skin at the back of my neck in a way I only get when someone says my name in a crowd. I whispered, "We should go." My own voice sounded too loud, even at a whisper, and the low sound swelled right over it like a wave taking your ankles. The stone face looked exactly the same, eyes closed, mouth relaxed, and somehow that made everything worse. If it had wept or moved or cracked, I could have said stone and mechanism and felt sane again. Instead, I watched a face that didn't do anything while everything in me wanted to move back. A voice called from behind us. "Park's closing in 15. We all jumped. A security guard in a neon vest and a knitted hat stood on the service road. She lifted a hand. "Sun's down by the time you get to the gate. Let's get moving." We nodded like idiots. Evan ended the recording and said thank you to the guard and to the stone in the same breath. We walked briskly to the path and then more briskly when the air went normal again, as if the place we'd been had pushed us out like a held breath. On the bus, my hands wouldn't warm up. Evan didn't play the file. Maya kept looking out the window, not at Albany sliding by, but at the reflection of us in the glass. "You guys want to go get a burger?" she asked, way too cheerful. We said yes because eating felt like a thing you could do that made sense. After food, back in the room, Evan plugged his phone into the little speaker we used for music and opened the memo. "We'll just, one time," he said. "Then I'll delete it." He didn't meet my eyes, the room filled with the 5 p.m. wind of a different place. We listened to our own shuffling and the dull thud of my shoe scuffing dirt. We heard the sobbing begin, and I felt the stupid hot rush of it in my chest again, as if hearing it on a speaker could make air thinner. Evan's recorded voice said hello. The sobbing paused, and in that pocket of silence I heard Maya whisper on the trailing edge of a laugh, "Oh my God." What came next came louder than it had in the graveyard, as if it had been waiting all that time to push into a space the size of our cinder block box. It filled the room's corners and the hollow places under the beds. It put pressure on my eyes. You don't think sound can press you, but it can. There was a second where I felt like if I opened my mouth, it would come out of me instead of words. The recording clicked off on its own. Evan fumbled for the phone. I didn't. The vent above the door sighed. Someone down the hall laughed, normal and human, and the sound of it was like stepping back onto a sidewalk after you've slipped in a dream. "Delete it," I said. "Please." He stared at the phone and then did it. He tapped trash and then tapped it again and then again, harder. Because sometimes your hands get dumb when you're scared. He emptied the trash and set the phone face down and sat on the floor with his back to the bed like someone had cut a rope. I wish I could say that fixed it. That night at 3:19, remember the time because I rolled over to check. My phone lit the room with the flat glow of a notification. Voice memo, new recording. I hadn't recorded anything. I hadn't granted any app permission I would tell you about. My thumb unlocked the phone before I decided to unlock it. And when I opened the memo, it didn't have a waveform. It had a static gray bar and a duration that said 0:0. I hit play anyway because we're not smart animals. We're curious ones. The room filled with soft, careful sobs. I threw the phone onto the rug like it had burned me and slapped the vent out of reflex. Evan was up in an instant. Is that me? It's mine, I said. And we stared at it like we were waiting for it to ring. We both deleted that file. It came back the next night. It came to Maya too, and she didn't talk to us for 2 days because she thought one of us had found a way to prank her remotely and didn't want to lose her temper and say something she couldn't take back. When she finally came to our room, she shut the door with her hip and said, without hello, "Play me yours." We did. She played hers. They weren't the same files. The rhythms were different. So close to the way someone's voice would change on different nights you could convince yourself you'd imagine the difference. On Maya's recording, the low knot language bent into something like a word that sounded too close to her mother's accent to be an accident. It didn't matter what it said. It mattered that it knew how to say. We spent the next week pretending we weren't talking about it as much as we were. Evan tried laying salt in lines by the vents. Maya brought a candle from a meditation class and said a thing she half remembered from a friend's grandmother. I called my older sister, who calls herself spiritual but not religious, and she said if I brought that grief home, she would change her locks. None of it helped. The files came back, sometimes with the date stamp of minutes before we had looked. Evan said the only useful stupid idea first. If the stone is where it starts, maybe we can make it stop there. He was gray around the mouth. He'd started to pick at his lower lip while he studied. The guy who used to tell me to listen to the way the elevator cable dragged was now listening for crying under everything. You could see the strain like a second shirt he couldn't take off. We went back on a Sunday at 4, early enough that the sun was at our backs by the time we got to the obelisk. The scarf was gone. The pennies were still there, copper turned dull. A little plastic dinosaur had been left since we last came, face up and smiling. I remember that because it felt like an insult to the serious wrongness in the air. This time we sat. We didn't record. That was the plan. If the sound had found us through our microphones, we'd deny it the path it used. We'd just talk, say what we wanted, ask it to quit. Who knows? Maybe grief listens. Maya lit her candle and cupped it in both hands and started with something so honest it hushed whatever snark I had loaded up. If you're mourning, I'm sorry. I don't know you. I can't help you. Please stop coming with us. We can't carry it. The wind went away like someone pinched out a wick. The sobbing began, short, nervous. I reached out and put my hand on the stone because I needed something to touch, and it was cold in a way that wasn't temperature. It felt like touching the flat face of a freezer full of frost. It felt like touching a mirror in a dark room, cool and smooth, and then your own skin coming back cold. Please, Evan said. We hear you. We can't help. The sobbing cut off like a loop at the end of a track. The low sound came up from under us, through the soles of our sneakers, through the thin bones of our ankles, and my mouth filled with the taste of wet dust, the way basements sometimes taste if you breathe with your mouth open. We stood without talking about standing. The hill felt like a drum someone had pressed a heavy hand on. No wind, no birds, no road, just that pressure and the sense that if we stepped wrong, we'd crack whatever skin lay over that voice and fall in. A man with a worker's jacket and a beard the color of steel wool came up the path with a shovel on his shoulder. He looked like every groundskeeper I've ever seen, already tired from a day of moving things other people don't want to move. He nodded at us barely. Closing soon, he said in the voice of a person who said it 100 times a week. If you're here after dark, you'll make my Sunday rough. Sorry, I said, like apologizing would fix any of the time that was already behind us. We left the candle, unlit now, on the bare dirt. We walked past the man. He smelled like wet rope. The shovel edge was clean, which I remember because I stared at it as we passed. When I turned back, because you have to, because leaving your back to a thing like that is worse than looking at it. He wasn't there, not around the stone, not on the road. The shovel wasn't on the ground. I stood in the middle of the path and told myself he'd stepped behind a monument and my angle had lost him. The way you can lose the moon behind a chimney even when you know it's bigger than that chimney will ever be. On the bus back, we didn't speak. In the room, the notifications were waiting for us. Voice memo, new recording for all three of us, all stamped within a minute of each other. None of us hit play. Evan deleted his. I deleted mine. Maya said, "What if deleting is how it gets bigger?" And then swore at herself because that's how your brain starts telling stories. It wants you to follow like a string into a maze. For the next month, the crying came irregularly. Sometimes there'd be a week of quiet and we'd start to relax. Then it would be there in the bathroom in the fan when the light went on. It would be at the back of a podcast under the host's voice. Only I knew it wasn't there for anyone else because I was the only one who stiffened at the sink. I saw the security guard from the cemetery once at a coffee place near campus. She had her vest folded over a chair and was reading a paperback about gardening. I almost went up and asked her what she heard out there at closing time, but she looked so normal, so uncomplicatedly part of daylight. I didn't. Mid-November, the three of us were at Maya's apartment off campus, eating soup and trying to pretend we were normal friends with normal problems. A woman in the apartment downstairs started yelling at her boyfriend, the kind of escalating domestic soundtrack that makes you hold your spoon still and listen for the sound of something breaking. When it didn't come, when the voices dropped to a steady burn, Maya said in a voice that wasn't like her at all, "I can't do this. I can't keep hearing other people's crying and then come home and have it in my vents too." She looked at Evan. "You brought this on us." He put his spoon down. "I know," he said. "I'm trying to make it stop." "How?" I asked. He looked very tired. "If it wants a recording, I'll give it one. Not of it, of me. Maybe it wants company. Maybe it wants a second voice. I'll sit there and I'll cry and I'll put my phone under the stone and I'll tell it doesn't need to make the sound anymore. I'll do it tonight." He said it with the blank steadiness of a person who's already made the choice and is only telling you out of courtesy. "Absolutely not," Maya said. "No way. You got a better plan?" He asked, too soft to be angry. That night, a little after 5, my phone buzzed with a text. "From Evan, sunset now. Come if you want." The words hit me with a messy mix of dread and responsibility, the way I felt when my little cousin wanted to jump into water a little too deep. I grabbed my jacket and my hat and ran down 3 flights because elevators suddenly felt like bad ideas in this life. By the time I got to the cemetery, the light had pulled back into the trees and made everything into paper cutouts. Maya met me at the gate, face red from the wind. "We don't let him do this alone," she said, as if I'd suggested we leave. We found him at the stone, knees on the dirt, phone face down at the base where the face looked out with eyes closed. He was breathing like he'd been running or like he was trying not to cry yet. He didn't look up when we came close. "Hey," I said, "please don't be stupid." He exhaled and it turned into a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a laugh. "Too late," he said. He started to cry. It wasn't clean. It wasn't the cinematic kind of crying where a single tear rolls. It was the cry of someone who'd been worn thin and then chose to open what was left. He pressed his forehead to the cold stone and let it go where it would go. I took a step forward to put a hand on his shoulder and Maya shook her head in this tiny movement. Not no as in don't care, but no as in maybe that would tangle something that was already too tangled. The sobbing from him and the sobbing from the place found a rhythm with each other. For a second I could pretend that was all this was. Sympathy, resonance, grief, matching grief like tuning forks. Then the low voice rose and spoke in a way I understood without understanding any word. Not thank you, not yes, but something like at last. Evan's crying changed. It turned from tears into these hitching breaths that didn't line up with what his body was doing. His shoulders shook on the wrong beats. His mouth opened and closed, and the sound that came out of him wasn't coming from him alone. "Evan," I said. "Buddy, hey, stop." The word landed like a pebble thrown at a building. The low voice kept speaking under him or through him, not quite using his tongue. His jaw worked. His eyes opened and he looked at me, and I couldn't tell if he saw me. For a split second I thought his eyes were somebody else's, not because they had changed color or shape, but because the way they were used. What looked out from them felt older than the ground under our feet. The candle Maya had brought before, long dead, lay on the dirt by my shoe. I bent and grabbed it because a thing in my hand felt better than air. I said, "Evan, give me the phone." Because that was something you can say to a person you live with that sometimes fixes small things. The sound under his voice thickened. The air had the taste of the inside of a stone you've licked as a kid just to see. That is not a poetic way to say it. It tasted like rock. "Hey!" This new voice snapped like a twig now from behind. A flashlight beam hit my coat and then the ground. Security again. A different guard this time, a man. Young enough to be a grad student on a weekend shift. Parks closed. "You can't." The beam slid over Evan's face to the stone, to Maya's hands empty and then clenching. It paused on the base where his phone lay. Is that? Look, you can't leave stuff here, the guard said. But there was an edge to it that said he wasn't sure this was the script anymore. I reached and took the phone because a person in a vest had given me an excuse. The minute my fingers lifted it, the low voice went quiet like someone yanked a cord out of a wall. Evan gasped a little boy breath and fell backward onto his heels. He put his hand out like he was catching himself on the ground he expected to be behind him. It looked like falling awake. Maya grabbed his elbow. We're going, she told the guard, and somehow made it sound like she was the authority here. We walked out with his weight between us. He cried again, but it was the very ordinary kind of crying you do when you hit your knee and are embarrassed. He kept saying, sorry, sorry, like he'd broken something at a friend's house. The guard didn't follow us past the first bend. Maybe he was only real to the angle of the stone. At the gate, Evan took his phone back. He held it like it weighed more than before. He didn't ask to play anything. He didn't unlock it at all. He just put it in his jacket pocket and nodded once in a way that was apology and thanks and I don't know, and everything at once. That night, no recordings came. The next night, mine didn't, but Maya got one at 2:12. The night after, I got one at 4. Evan got nothing for 3 days and then woke up with his phone playing it at full volume on his nightstand. Screen dark, speaker on, no app open. I threw a t-shirt over it and that made it worse, like throwing a blanket over a crying person. We watched it with the stupid superstition that watching matters. When it stopped, it had never started. No history, no entry, no proof. Finals came. The weather collapsed into gray and stayed there a month. We went home for winter break. The first night in my parents' quiet house down the hall from the room where I used to keep my baseball posters, my phone vibrated on the nightstand, and I knew without looking. The tile floor in their kitchen will forever be a late night memory of my bare feet and me standing with my ear against the refrigerator like a thief because the hum of that old motor had a wet edge to it that hadn't been there when I was 15. I wish the story had an ending. I wish I could tell you the ritual, the person, the explanation. Evan did not die. He didn't vanish. He transferred the next semester to a school closer to home. We still text holiday emojis and hope you're good. Sometimes there's a pause before he answers that feels like he's set the phone down and is waiting for something to finish before he can type. Maya graduated and moved to Boston and refuses to live anywhere with forced air heat. She has radiators now and says they click and bang, and that's predictable and fine. As for the cemetery, people keep going. They leave pennies and scarves and kinder things than those. Some nights it probably doesn't cry at all and it's only a hill with names. Other nights, when the warmth is taken out of the air and nothing replaces it, somebody sits there long enough to hear the soft sobbing of grief that isn't their own, and a second sound answers. Because that's how echoes work in some places. If you record it, it will be grateful. If you delete it, it will understand and send you another one. Gentler because it still needs a second voice. I moved across town at the end of that year, into an old place with creaky floors and baseboards that shed paint if you look at them wrong. On the night I moved in, the building was settling and every sound had a reason. Then the vents whispered in a way metal shouldn't. The pipes sighed. Somewhere below the traffic and my own breath, a sadness I didn't earn scraped the bottom of the room. I told myself there are no voices here. That's what I say now. There are no voices here. It helps me sleep more than it helps me believe. Last night, after a year of mostly quiet, my phone lit up at 3:19 like it always does when it refuses to let me not know the time. New recording, the bar said, and this time there was a waveform. I looked at it for a long time because there is power in not hitting play, and wondered if that was what that place wanted, to know that I saw it and had to choose. I pressed the little triangle before I could give myself a speech about self-respect. At first I heard nothing at all, just the silence of a microphone that hasn't yet decided what counts as signal and what counts as noise. Then the sobbing moved in, small and careful. The lower sound rose from under the floor and shaped itself around my name again in a way that felt less like an address than like a receipt. Underneath both there was another sound, very faint, and I only realized what it was after my brain stopped telling me it was feedback. It was my own voice, the sound of me moving around the apartment earlier that day, humming under my breath without thinking while I unpacked a box. The thing had kept that in its pocket. The way someone might keep a photo they plan to return to you later so you know they were in your house. I deleted the file while it was still playing. The sound kept going for a second like water in a pipe, then stopped cleanly. The trash was empty. There's no proof I could show you that any of this happened. If you need there to be proof, I hope that keeps you safe. This morning I went out and sat in my car with the heater on and watched the windows fog and then clear. Fog and then clear. And for a second, the residue on the glass made a shape like a face, calm and closed-eyed, just a suggestion in the condensation. It looked like any face you could make in your own breath. I wiped it with my sleeve and watched the heater erase the last of it. I've learned the sound isn't loud unless I try to make it quiet. If I leave my phone in another room, it finds a vent. If I close the vent, it takes the space under doors. It doesn't want to hurt me, I don't think. It wants to be heard. That's all crying ever is, really. A request to not be alone with it. That's the worst and most ordinary thing about this story. If you go sit where we sat and wait long enough, you'll hear it. If you record it, you'll be 2 people listening instead of 1. If you play it later, you'll be 2 again wherever you are, and then you'll be 3, and then it will not matter how far you move or how many phones you buy. When I open the voice memos app now, there's nothing there. It's clean. It looks like any phone. I'm writing this at my kitchen table with the fridge doing its normal hum, and the street doing its normal tires, and the building doing the small groans buildings do. There is a shape under all that, quiet as a held breath. And I am not going to check the time because I already know it's a minute when the hours are thin. If you hear crying later and you've never been to the cemetery, you'll tell yourself it's the pipes or the wind in the neighbor's tree, and you will be right because those are also the truth. If you sit long enough in any place and ask it to tell you what it's holding, it will eventually answer. All I can say is that at Albany Rural there's a stone that learned to do it first, and once you put your ear to what it's saying, other things will find their way to your door to finish the sentence. I'm going to finish this and turn on the faucet and let it run a second so the water's cold, and I'm going to fill a glass and drink with the absurd faith that water solves something. When I put the glass down, the fridge will kick on, and if it stutters on the start, I'll probably tell myself it's nothing. I don't sit at my table anymore and beg it to stop. That never worked. Sometimes, when it's very late, I talk in a quiet voice like you use with a friend and say, "I hear you." Sometimes that helps. Sometimes the room gets so still it feels like being in a car under a bridge while a train passes overhead. Sometimes I fall asleep to it like a fan I forgot to buy. The only promise I'm willing to make is this. If I wake at 3:19 to a new recording and it says there's a place I should go, I won't. If you were smart, you wouldn't either. I drove nights in Rochester for 6 years. If you lived near Strong Memorial and your kid got a fever at 2 in the morning, there was a decent chance I was the one who rolled up to your curb. If you missed the last bus at the corner of South and Gregory after a double at the restaurant, I was the warm car you slid into with your apron still on and your hands smelling like fryer oil. Nights were my thing because I liked the quiet between fares, and I liked the way the city felt emptied out and honest. I also liked the money. Bar close and hospital shifts paid my rent. I was 33 and not superstitious in any organized way. I believed in bad luck and in tired minds seeing patterns, and I believed in the Genesee River fog that could make you feel like the world had shrunk to the size of your hood ornament. That was enough belief for a job like mine. On weeknights around 3, the dispatch board thinned. You could go 10 minutes without a ding. When that happened, I cut across the south side to keep position for the next call. The fastest line from the student bars to the night shift nurses was down Mount Hope Avenue. It runs along the cemetery with the same name. And in the dead hours, the iron fence is the only thing that tells you the difference between road and graves. If you live in Rochester, you know Mount Hope Cemetery, even if you never go in. The fence goes on forever. Black pickets, and behind it hills with old trees and monuments from an era when people carved grief in stone, like it had to be heavy to count. I liked the route because it was straight and mostly empty, and the streetlights made little islands of sight where deer sometimes froze and stared at you with liquid eyes like marbles. This was in late October, a wind-torn night that smelled like leaves and damp brick. I had just dropped a guy at a house near the South Wedge. He worked dish pit at a place on Monroe and had given me the usual story about getting clean soon for real this time. Dispatch was quiet. I rolled south on Mount Hope Avenue with the radio low and the meter reset. The fence was on my right, the sloped shadows of the cemetery on the other side of it. The city had just replaced a few of the lights, but it still looked like a hallway with some bulbs out. Halfway along where a service gate cuts inward, my headlights picked up a figure leaning against the fence. He was a man. Old overcoat, the kind with wide lapels and too many buttons. He had the collar up against the wind and one shoulder cocked like his arm hurt. He wasn't waving. He wasn't flagging me down. He was just leaned back, head tilted toward the road as if he was listening to the cars that weren't coming. It's not unusual to see someone at the fence. People visit at odd hours. They leave flowers like they don't know the gates lock at dusk, and I've seen kids dare each other to stick their arms between the pickets. But this was different. He was alone, no flowers, no phone in his hand. He wasn't standing by an entrance. He was at that long stretch where there's nothing but fence and trees and the rise of ground beyond. I slowed. Habit. You see someone who might be in trouble, you don't blow past. The rule in my own head was to roll slow enough to make eye contact and then read it. Drunks, angry boyfriends, people muttering at the sky, you learn to read quick. My headlight swept across him, and for a second I lost him in the shadow between lamps. Then he wasn't leaning against the fence anymore. He was at the edge of the sidewalk right up by the road. He hadn't walked there. He was just closer when the light found him again. My foot came off the gas without me telling it to. He turned his head toward my windshield and his eyes caught the beams and reflected them back the way a cat's do. Not bright like a flashlight, not green. A dim amber flash like the color of a moth's wing. Human eyes don't do that. I know the word for the shiny layer that gives animals night vision. Tapetum lucidum. Humans don't have it. I put my foot down. Not hard. Enough to make the engine clear its throat. He didn't step out. He didn't make any move to throw himself in front of me. He just stood with his hands down and the coat falling open a little, and those dull gold eyes turning with the car. I checked the rear view as I passed him because it would have felt wrong not to. Like you put a hand too close to a stove and had to know if the red coil was really on. The road behind me was empty. The patch of sidewalk was there, the fence was there, a ragged clump of weeds at the base of the pickets was there. No man in a coat. When I dropped the next fare at Strong and pulled into the taxi lot to eat a sandwich, the wind rocked the car. The hospital lights felt safe the way big institutions feel safe even when you know bad things happen inside. I told myself a story about the man's eyes. A reflection off his glasses. A person can be standing farther back than you think when you first spot them. Maybe my headlights made a weird angle with the sidewalk where it dips. Maybe. Sometimes you have to build a reason like scaffolding around a thing so it doesn't fall into your day. Didn't think about it again until the morning. I keep my cab in my sister's garage because her place has a driveway and mine doesn't. It was around 10 when I pulled in, and my nephew waved from the porch like a kid who'd been waiting for cartoons and got me instead. He ran up and said, "Auntie wants you in the kitchen," and then he laughed because he's 6 and everything is a joke. I was halfway up the steps when I heard him go quiet and then say, "Uncle Nate, why is there a hand on your car?" I went back down. The trunk of the cab had muddy prints on it as if someone with wet hands had pressed and dragged down. Not crisp like on TV. Smears with the suggestion of fingers. The marks were too wide to be a raccoon. There were 2 side by side near the latch and another on the right where the slope curves toward the taillight. They had grit in them, dark earth and dots of leaf. The car is white. It showed like bruises. I stood there pretending it was just dirt, and my sister stood behind me with a dish towel in her hand and said, "That is not okay. Do you need to call someone?" I said no, because who do you call to report mud? I got a bucket and a brush and scrubbed until the white came back and a couple of gray shadows stayed like they had soaked into the paint. On the radio that night, I mentioned it to Marcus, a guy I'd known since high school who drove the late shift too. He laughed in that way you laugh when you want to make a thing small but you're actually measuring it. He said, "You finally met the fence man." I said, "That's a thing." He said, "Ask Gloria." Gloria is our dispatcher. Retired teacher voice. She's the kind of person who can make you sit up in your seat without seeing her face. I keyed the mic and asked, "What's the fence man?" There was a pause long enough for me to picture her in the little office with the maps on the wall and the police scanner on low. Then she said, "Don't be a dummy. Don't stop along the cemetery after midnight." It was the tone your mother uses about not picking up dead birds with your hands. A fact, old and boring. No story attached. It could have been the power of suggestion, but after that the things around Mount Hope felt wrong. The radio turned to static when I passed the northern gate, and stayed that way until I hit the light by Elmwood. The meter on the dash flickered twice and reset on me for no reason I could explain to a passenger. The car went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the actual temperature. October went into November and the wind became the kind that sneaks under your coat and brings a smell with it. Wet iron, like the fence had a scent. When I rolled the window down a crack to clear the fog, it came in and sat on my tongue. If you've ever handled an old set of keys, you know the taste. I told Lena about it because she's the only person who gets a version of my life where I don't edit out the weird parts. She works days at a dental clinic, goes to bed early, and puts up with me walking in at noon and making coffee like it's morning. She listened and said, "You're fried. You need a break. You can't do this shift forever." I said, "I know." She said, "No, listen. I've been reading about sleep and our brains and how night workers think they see things because they only ever wake up to the night." She was trying to be kind and practical at once. I nodded and said maybe she was right. 3 nights later, I picked up a student at the River campus. He got in smelling like weed and told me to take him to a friend's on South Goodman. We went down Mount Hope because it was habit and because I didn't want to give the idea that I was avoiding anything. He sat in the back and hummed to himself, and then, passing the fence, he leaned forward and said, "Did you ever hear about the guy with cat eyes?" He said it in the voice of someone telling a camp story. I said, "What guy?" He said, "My roommate swears he saw a homeless dude by the fence with eyes that flashed when his buddy hit him with a flashlight." He said they kept joking they had seen a raccoon standing up. The kid laughed and sat back again and was asleep by the time we turned on Goodman. I kept telling myself to be a grown-up. Leave the stories to the kids. Don't feed it. The sensible voice works until it doesn't. What broke it was a call that came in from a payphone that shouldn't have been working, at least according to Gloria. She read the number off the screen and said it belonged to a box out by the old service entrance. Then she laughed at herself and said, "If I say payphone one more time, I'll feel like a ghost." The request was short trip cash, no account. I said I was 2 minutes away, punched the hazard to make the turn, and came up the stretch where the fence bends. He stepped from between the iron pickets like a shadow leaning forward into light. He had the same coat, the same tight shoulders, like his neck hurt. He didn't wave. He just set his eyes on the car and they made that amber pulse. Not bright, not strong, but unmistakable the way certain smells are unmistakable even if they're faint. He opened the rear door and got in like a normal person. He didn't feel like one. There is a weight to another body in your car that you get used to. It balances the frame, shifts the sound of the tires. This was different. The air itself felt full. He shut the door and sat without speaking. The back seat was cold. I asked, "Where to, sir?" He said, "Robinson Drive." The voice was not old, not young, just used. The way a shoe is used, I put the car in drive. The meter flickered and timed out and then came back like it had fallen asleep for a second. I checked the mirror. He had his face turned toward the window, but his profile was wrong in a way I wouldn't have been able to describe if you'd paused the world and handed me a pencil. He had a hat now, a brim pulled down low so all I saw was cheekbone and the line of a mouth that didn't move. His coat was wet, but it wasn't raining. I could smell leaves. The heater blew and made no difference to the cold. There's a gate off Robinson Drive. If you live here, you know it. It's the one they use for maintenance trucks. I turned onto Robinson and the street was empty. The house is asleep. The porch lights either on timers or left on by people who like the way a glow looks on snow. We came up on the gate and he said, "Here is good." I braked. The rear door opened before I had fully stopped and then shut. The weight lifted. In the mirror there was no one. I sat there in gear with my foot on the brake, and then I did something I still can't square with myself. I put the car in park and got out. The night was pin drop still. You could hear the heater fan through the open door the way you hear blood in your ears after a run. I walked around to the back because some part of me wanted to prove to another part of me that the mud had been a coincidence. I wanted a clean trunk, no handprints, no leaves. My breath steamed out. The trunk had 2 marks just above the license plate, wet and fresh as if hands had pressed there and slid, not down but up. Like someone had pushed themselves onto the back of the car, I unlocked the trunk without thinking and popped it. The lid rose and a smell came up hard and sudden. It was the smell that fills your nose when you open a basement door that hasn't been opened since spring. Wet soil, old wood, there was nothing inside. I keep jumper cables, a neon triangle, an old blanket. The blanket was damp at one end, as if it had wicked up water from a floor. There was a thin twig in there, snapped clean and lying diagonally across the mat like a part of a broom. I plucked it out and my fingers stung like I'd touched metal in winter. It wasn't cold enough for that to happen. From the other side of the fence came a rattle. Not loud, a light knocking like metal tapping metal. It moved along the fence line as if someone were dragging something across the pickets at knee height. I closed the trunk without slamming it because slamming would have felt like admitting something. I walked around my car and the tapping moved with me but a little ahead, like it was leading me toward the bend where the trees grow close. I stopped walking and the knocking stopped. I took one more step and something flashed in the corner of my eye and made me turn. He was at the fence 3 posts down. His coat hung straight and dark and his head was tilted the way you watch a dog listen to a sound it can't place. His eyes turned toward me and pulsed once with that moth-wing color. I didn't say anything witty or brave. I didn't say anything at all. I got into my car and drove. Marcus and I watched the dash cam the next afternoon in the fluorescent light of the shop while a guy changed my rear pads. I had bought the camera off a friend and wired it myself to the fuse box. It records forward and back. The forward video showed the empty road and the fence and then me pulling to the curb. The back camera showed the street behind me and the shine of the trunk lid. We watched 2 minutes at normal speed. Nothing. We watched it again at half speed. Nothing. Marcus said, "Freeze it. There, roll just a hair." He had his nose almost pressed to the little screen. On the trunk there was a blotch. In one frame it was just glare. In the next it had length. In the next it had shape and the suggestion of spread fingertips. 3 frames. A fifth of a second, then gone. When the mechanic came into the office to tell me the pads were cooked, he looked at the screen and said, "Who's that?" He wasn't looking at the trunk. He was looking at the narrow slice of fence captured by the reflection in the glass of my rear window. In that slice there was a silhouette where there hadn't been one when we ran it the first time. A hat brim and a shoulder and the suggestion of an arm. The mechanic shrugged and said, "Probably a trick of light." Then he quoted me a number for the pads that made me swear out loud because it wasn't a trick. I pretended I could file it away under weird and kept working. That's what you do when the rent doesn't care about your ideas of the world. The city slid toward winter. One night I had a nurse in the front seat sharing fries from a drive-thru, and as we passed the fence she said, "Can you feel that?" I said, "What?" She said, "Like we just drove into a freezer." I kept my face neutral because people in my line of work learned to be the mirror of the person paying. She said her grandmother was buried in there and that the old woman hated cold and had sworn she would haunt a place with a heater. She laughed, and then she apologized for talking about the dead. It felt like chatter people use when they don't want to sit in silence with a stranger. When I dropped her at a brick building near the hospital, she touched my arm and said, "Drive safe. If you see that man, don't make eye contact." I never told her about the eyes. I never told anyone but Lena and the guys at the shop. It still puts something stiff and dumb in my chest to remember the way the nurse said that. The worst night was a week before Thanksgiving. The city had that empty feeling it gets when students go home and the businesses start putting up lights because they're supposed to. It was around 4. The radio had been quiet long enough that music on low had filled the car like a breath you forget you're holding. I was northbound on Mount Hope, fence on my left, and a small stone hung in my stomach like I was dragging it on a string. I don't know why I even looked over. Maybe the wind pushed a branch and a shadow moved. Maybe everything in me had decided to make it happen so it could be done with. I looked across the lane and saw a shape inside the fence moving with my car. Not at my speed. That would have been one kind of fear. This was worse. The shape was moving from tree to tree in a series of pauses, as if it were choosing when to be seen. For 1 second it was behind a trunk and then it was not. And each time it was not, it was closer to the fence. The coat was there, the hat was there, the shoulders were wrong like a suit a size too tight. The eyes did not flash. They didn't need to. He stepped right up to the fence while my car was still moving. And then he was not at the fence but at the curb. And then he was at the line where the asphalt chips and breaks near the manhole. There is no good way to describe how something can be there. And then closer the way a sound is closer when you touch your ear to a wall. 1 second, then the next, and if you cut the film into frames you could put a ruler on the difference. I floored it. The car lurched. The engine roared. The trunk thumped like a sack of sand had been dropped on it. The rear window view filled with a smear of dark. Not the road, not the fence, a shape right up against the glass. There was a sound like knuckles rapping 3 times, measured and almost polite. A smell of leaves flooded in through a vent that shouldn't have been open. I did not scream. I swore the way you do when you hit your thumb with a hammer and your body wants a word to bleed into. I crossed Elmwood on a yellow that had already turned red and my tires skittered because of the wet. When I hit the straight under the hospital lights, the trunk thumped again. Lighter, like something dropping away, and the car eased back into the ordinary world. I circled the loop by the emergency entrance because it was the nearest ring of light I could think of. Security watched me through glass. I got out under the flood and checked the trunk. The handprints were there again, fresh and dark and placed like someone had crouched on the bumper and then slid upward to look in. The license plate had a line down it like a nail had scored the plastic. When I put my hand on the lid, it felt cold enough to make the bones in my fingers ache. The hospital's heat blew out the automatic doors. A nurse walked past and didn't look at me because I was just another guy in a jacket with a car, and a story no one wanted to stand in the wind to hear. I got back in and drove to the shop and hosed the trunk in the wash bay until the water ran clear and my hands were numb. I told myself enough was enough. I started taking the long way around, inside streets that added 5 minutes to each run. I didn't tell dispatch because there's always some guy on the radio who thinks you're soft and wants to say it in a voice everyone can hear. I didn't tell Lena I had changed my route because she would have smiled in that gentle way she has when I finally do the sensible thing on my own. For a week it helped. A week is a long time when you're counting shifts. On the 8th night I had an airport run at 6 in the morning, dawn coming in a sheet of dull metal over the east side. The guy in the back wore a thick sweater and had eyes like someone who wakes before an alarm. He said he had a flight to Florida to see his mother. He said the cold messes with her bones. We came up on the highway entrance and something knocked on the trunk again, 3 times, calm and spaced like a metronome. The passenger heard it. His head came up. He said, "What was that?" I said, "Probably the jack loose." He said, "Is it safe?" I said, "You'll be fine." I dropped him and pulled into the far corner of the airport lot where no one parks. The wind cut across in a steady sheet. I opened the trunk and there was nothing inside that hadn't been there yesterday, except for a short length of rusted wire curled like a question mark by the latch. It was the exact orange-brown of old fence. I picked it up with 2 fingers and tossed it into the trash can by the luggage carts. When it hit the plastic, it rang with a tiny note like a fork against a glass. The sound made the hair on my forearm stand up. A fool part of me wanted to reach into the can and take it back out, as if throwing it away had been rude. I shut the trunk and stood there with my hand on the lid until a cop in a hat rolled by slow, and I waved to be normal, and got in my car and left. I've tried to make this into something sensible in the months since. I've given that man every very human face I can. A prankster with reflective contacts. A kid with a mask. A real person caught in the light at a bad angle in a city where we often fail the people standing at fences in the middle of the night. I know exhaustion makes the boundaries of things soft. I know fear puts shapes into soft places. I have done the whole test where you go back in daylight and look at the slope of the ground and the spacing of the trees. And you tell yourself that anything seems closer when you expect it to. I even walked inside the cemetery one afternoon when it was open and the grounds crew were out. I went to the section near where I had first seen him and stood by the fence looking out at the road. Cars hissed past. A man pushing a stroller glanced at me and then didn't look again. A grounds worker in a neon vest drove a little cart by and nodded. The fence from that side is taller. You feel like a kid standing at a counter waiting to be noticed. I kept my hands at my sides because the urge to touch the metal was not an urge I wanted to indulge. There were indentations in the earth where water runs after rain. There were long gouges where a truck had once turned too tight. There were no footprints because the day was dry. If you need an ending to all of this, I don't have one. The point of sharing it is not to plant a flag in a clear explanation. The point is to make a shape out of a thing so it lives somewhere other than the dark at the edge of my route. I still drive nights. I still cut past the cemetery sometimes when the timing works, when the radio dings and I need the straight shot. I don't slow along the fence. If someone looks like they need help, I call it in from the corner under the light at Elmwood. The radio still spits static for a few seconds by the northern gate like it has a memory. Once in a while, a passenger will ask me why the heater suddenly feels weak for 1 block, and I'll lie and say the thermostat does a weird blink there because of the wind off the hill. I don't lean on the trunk when I'm tired, and I don't set my coffee on it. I wash it every morning, and there are faint gray shapes I can only see when the car is angled a certain way, and the sun hits dull through cloud. Lena says sleep is medicine, and she is right. When I take 2 days in a row, my head clears and the fence is just a fence again. Then a night will come where the city looks like a painting behind glass, and a man in an old coat will be standing with his shoulder crooked just so. And when the headlights catch him, his eyes will remind me of an animal that knows how to stand very still and wait for you to notice that you are the one inside a fence. If you cut through Mount Hope after midnight, don't stop along the long runs of iron. If you do stop, keep your hands to yourself. Keep your eyes on the road, and in the morning, rinse your trunk even if it looks clean. If a thin strip of rusted wire drops out from somewhere it shouldn't be, don't bring it into your house. If anyone asks, tell them a tired driver told you to stop doing small brave things in places that don't need them. Tell them I said that's how you let something ride home on your back without feeling its weight, until you park and kill the engine, and listen to the ticking of the car cooling. And in the silence between ticks you hear a knuckle ask to be let in. I'm not from Sleepy Hollow. I grew up an hour south on the Jersey side, which is probably why the town never felt like a legend to me. It felt like a place you could miss your turn and end up on a dead end by the river, or eat a soggy sandwich on a wet bench and watch the traffic crawl up Route 9. I only started spending time there because my girlfriend Jenna loved old cemeteries and weird history. She dragged me to antique shops and ghost tours while I carried a thermos and pretended my feet weren't freezing. That's how we met Omar and later Mrs. Van Brunt, and how I ended up doing 2 nights of volunteer security for a historical society fundraiser inside the old Dutch church burying ground. If you haven't seen it in person, it looks exactly like the pictures except smaller and closer to the road. The church is a squat stone building that lets your voice echo back softer than you'd think. The burying ground is a scramble of tilted markers and box tombs with names that sound like they should be carved into wooden ships. There's a fence, sure, but it doesn't keep out the wind or the idea that every foot of that hill remembers someone. The Sleepy Hollow Cemetery is next door and way larger with famous graves and tourists, but the old Dutch burying ground is older. The stones lean toward the river like they're tired. We were there in late March, not Halloween. That matters. The tour guides weren't playing Headless Horseman music from a Bluetooth speaker, and there weren't any fog machines. It was a Tuesday night, 38 degrees and chalk gray cloud cover that held the last of winter like a grudge. The fundraiser was a dry meet and greet with local donors that ended at 9. At 10, the church volunteer coordinator asked if I could stick around for 2 hours because the hired guard had a family emergency. Omar said he could use the extra hands too. He was a few years older than me, a grounds tech who did everything from shovel snow to fix bulbs. He had the kind of patience that makes kids trust you, and the kind of fatigue that makes adults respect you. I said sure because Jenna was still taking photos of ironwork by the gate and because keeping watch over old stones sounded like the easiest kind of favor. The story about the empty coffin came up while we were making coffee in the church's tiny side room that smelled like lemon cleaner and damp hymnals. It wasn't a story we asked to hear. It was one of those things that arrives because someone's tongue is loose with tiredness. Mrs. Van Brunt was there, a woman in her 70s with straight white hair and a tweed coat that made her look like she'd stepped out of a sepia photograph. She'd been on site earlier than everyone and refused to leave until the last chair was stacked. When I asked whether the old floorboards bothered her hips, she smiled and told me about worse things than floors. During renovations, years ago, she said, hands cupped around the mug like she needed heat to keep her voice warm, they found a collapsed coffin near the low fence. Not a burial you can point to on any map. A depression in the ground, soft underneath like a rotten tooth. They lifted just enough earth to see wood. When they pried it open, there was nothing inside but claw marks. Deep gouges in the lid, nothing else. No bones, no cloth. No explanation. They closed it and set it deeper, because leaving such a thing is unkind and we are custodians here, not storytellers. She paused there, and her eyes did something I don't want to try to describe. Stories tell themselves. Omar rolled his eyes, but only with the top half of his face. You know that's exactly the kind of thing people donate for, right? He said. You say custodians, but you sell bookmarks with the horseman on them. Mrs. Van Brunt shrugged in a way that reminded me good ghosts mind their manners. Donations are for preserving the truth. We do not invent that. But we cannot stop what walks when people insist on prodding the ground at night. Jenna looked up from her camera to ask where exactly the collapsed coffin had been, and the answer was so casual it took a second to register. Where the path turns by the iron gate, she said. Where the stones make a little corridor. Those who linger say they hear scratching. It moves with them until they leave. If you stand too long, you may feel the earth shift underfoot. Best to keep walking. After that, nobody wanted more coffee. The donors left in a trickle. You can tell the difference between people who love history for the story and people who love it for the soberness of names and dates. The former say thank you and go home buzzing with possibilities. The latter take off their hats when they cross the grass and they do not say how they feel. By 9:45, the lot was empty except for our car and a police SUV idling with its lights off. The officer inside gave us a two-finger wave and drove down Broadway without hurry. "You sure you want to hang around?" Omar asked Jenna. "You'll freeze." "She always freezes," I said. "She likes it. It makes her photos look like film." Jenna pulled up her hood. "I'll go around once more, then head to the diner. Text me if you hear anything cool." She kissed my cheek and then stepped onto the path between the stones, the little one that curls like a question toward the fence. I watched her walk into the gray. Streetlights from the road slapped pale across the tips of the stones, but the ground itself seemed darker than it should have been, like all the color drained into the soil over 3 centuries and stayed there. There's a point where the path narrows between 2 box tombs and the fence beyond looks like the iron teeth of a comb. Jenna turned, took a photo, and lifted 2 fingers in a mock salute like the cop had. Then she moved out of frame and we were alone in the side room with our breath fogging the little square window. "Scratch marks," Omar muttered. "People buried alive was a thing, but not like that." "Weren't there safety bells?" I asked. "Like strings tied to fingers and bells on the surface. That was more of an idea than a practice," he said. "And anyway, if someone got out, where'd they go? You open a box and there's claw marks inside and no bones, that's not a rescue. That's a riddle." By 10:15, the church was quiet the way a refrigerator is quiet. You hear a hum you only notice when it stops. We did a loop around the path with flashlights, partly to shoo away any kids trying to climb fences and partly because saying you'll keep watch obligates you to actually watch. On the far side by the fence, the ground was soft and bouncy with thaw. You could feel your weight press down a memory of last year's leaves underneath. I did not hear the scratching then. It started when Jenna texted me a photo of a name barely visible on a slanted stone. Just the capital letters VAN, everything else erased by acid rain or history. And I realized I could hear something like a small animal in the walls, except there weren't any walls out there. Omar heard it too because he stopped and looked at me like it was my phone making the noise. It wasn't my phone. It was a dry, frantic sound without a fur sound around it, like something hard dragging on something hard. Not nails on a chalkboard, nails on wood. Because I'm a normal idiot, I shone my light into the grass first, expecting to see a raccoon or a possum. The beam of my flashlight made my breath look like smoke. The sound came again, to my right now. Then ahead of us, by the little corridor between the box tombs, thin, quick scratches in sets of 3. 3 and pause, then a longer, ragged run. The kind of rhythm you notice only because it's odd. We froze on the path for maybe 2 seconds. Then we did not freeze. We kept walking because I heard Mrs. Van Brunt's voice in my head say the words best to keep walking. "Omar?" I said, like asking his name was some kind of spell that could make him substantial. "Keep walking," he said. We turned the corner by the iron gate and the fence rattled as if a truck had gone by. But the road behind it was empty. The scratches skittered from our right to our left, then fetched up right behind my left heel, not touching but convicting my nerves anyway. I wanted to ask Omar if it was under me or behind me, and then I decided I didn't want the answer in words. My muscles wanted to run. The part of my brain that had sat through too many history lectures decided that running from a sound in a graveyard was beyond cliché. So we walked fast like people late for a train, and we didn't speak again until we reached the little side door of the church and closed it. Inside, the sound died like a radio going fuzzy and off. The heater clanked. My heart did a different kind of clanking. "Probably tree roots," Omar said after a minute, as if the pause made the excuse more respectable. "Rubbing on something. Frozen ground moving." "Roots don't scratch," I said, then immediately realized how stupid it sounded. Roots don't scratch because we don't hear them, but they do push. They can split stone and lift plastic. But I had heard scratching. I had. The rhythm was human. 3, pause, drag. Jenna came back around 10:50 and found us both pretending to be interested in a pamphlet about architectural restoration. She said she'd go to the diner to warm up, then head home. She asked us to send her anything interesting if we stuck around longer, then kissed my jaw again. She has this target she aims for that makes me feel like I'm the one collected. Not her. Her hand squeezed my arm. "You okay?" she asked, and I said sure. She gave me that look you give someone who's about to stubborn their way into a dumb decision, and left anyway because she knows me. The second loop started because Omar wanted to prove a point. He fetched a metal probe they use for testing ground firmness before setting up risers, a slender rod with a T-handle. "If I can find a pocket," he said, "we can blame the noise on settling. Air moving, water doing what it does." He wanted it to be mechanical. I let him have his hypothesis because the alternative was letting the story recognize my name. We stepped back into air that felt colder than before. It does that sometimes. Drops after the main act like a curtain call for winter. The path answered with a small crispness under our soles. We kept our lights down low so they wouldn't mess with our night vision too much. We didn't talk. Talking would have made us sound like we were daring something, and I had zero appetite for being heard that way. When we reached the little corridor, the same cold dread lifted up and sat on my shoulders like a damp coat. The scratch came from my right, small and hopeless and furious. I felt it in my teeth. Omar set the probe and pressed into the soil by the fence. It sank 6 inches and stopped. He shifted left and tried again. The rod went in 8 inches with the slow give of damp loam. He moved a third time, almost exactly where the path pinches to pass between the box tombs, and pushed. There was resistance, then a sudden give that made him lurch. The rod slid down so fast it burned his palms and hit wood with a thunk I felt in my spine. We both pulled in the same breath. He leaned his weight on the probe and it did not go farther. He twisted it and it scraped. The ground trembled. Not the way the earth shakes in an earthquake, but the way a floor shivers when someone heavy stomps in the next room. The scratches came so near they could have been inside my shoe. I lifted my foot because my brain served up the image of a hand under the sole of my boot. And that image came so clear I could feel the tendons move. "Back up," I said. Omar didn't. He was a good man and a dumb one for a second, both at once. He pressed down again, leaning, and the rod tilted and hit wood again. Not the hollow echo of a lid exactly, but the tired knock of something old and close. Then, clear as a fingernail on your desk, 3 quick scratches ran right under the rod. Not an animal. Not roots. Nothing that belongs in dirt. Omar's face did a thing I'd never seen him do before. He closed his eyes and let go of the handle. We stood there for a breath and the ground shifted under us with that weird buoyant give that says the top is not ready for the bottom. We backed away together. We did not run. I remember that with stupid pride. We walked like people leaving a room where someone is asleep and dangerous. The scratches followed 2 steps and then stopped, as if the thing that made them had only that much chain or that much prayer. We kept walking until the church door had our fingerprints on it again. We locked the door. We turned on the lights. We stood under their hum because it sounded like something made by a person that knew how to go home at night. And then we did the dumbest, bravest thing I've done recently. We waited. We waited to see if the sound would come through the wood of a building that's seen more winters than my family's been in this country. It didn't. After 15 minutes, with no noise besides Omar's restless zip on a jacket, I went to the bathroom and splashed my face with water that smelled faintly metallic. When I came back, he was staring at the handle of the probe on the floor. "Don't tell Jenna I let go of that," he said. And somehow that was funny enough that I laughed, and then we both started laughing for real. The way you do when you're halfway out of fear and into the stupid relief that makes you want to celebrate gravity. We closed up at midnight. The police SUV passed again, slow and inattentive, and drove on. On the way to the car, I felt the path under my feet compress once, like stepping on a soft stair. I didn't hear scratching. I didn't look down. At home, I pulled off my boots and set them by the radiator. One of them caught on the rug. The sole was nicked along the outer edge with 3 fresh parallel lines. Not scuffs, not gravel wounds. 3 clean slices like someone had dragged a box cutter against the rubber. My stomach did a slow curling thing like it remembered being someone else's stomach thousands of years ago, when people slept closer to dirt. I didn't tell Jenna about the marks right away. I told her about the scratching because that felt like a thing you could compare to something else. She made tea and said she'd go back in daylight and get better photos so we could find the exact spot. I told her that Mrs. Van Brunt said to keep walking, and she said that advice goes for most creepiness. The next afternoon we went back. It's amazing how daylight makes you think nighttime is a personality defect you imagined. The burying ground looked like a portrait of itself. Gray and green frugal colors with birds hopping around as if they owned the place and hated rent. Omar met us by the gate with a rake and a polite reluctance to talk about anything deeper than leaves. He didn't bring the probe. He kept a normal friend smile and a slightly red mark on his palm. We found the spot easily. The path narrows between two old box tombs that look like stone chests with their lids still on. The fence is right there, and beyond it you can see cars and people who have never had the ground speak to them. Jenna squatted to take a shot of the lichen on the lid edge, the way it makes a geography of islands. I stood exactly where I had heard the scratching and felt like a tourist in my own fear. I might have convinced myself nothing had happened if not for the thing I saw when I touched the dirt with my fingers. It looked like a flat splinter of wood, old and light, the kind of thing you'd get from prying up a crate. Only the grain was close and the color was not pine. I brushed away the top layer of mud and there it was, the edge of something that had been shaved thin by contact. I pulled it free slowly. It came away with the particular stubbornness of wood that's been in wet for too long. The fragment was maybe the length of my thumb and smooth on one side, scored on the other with 3 tight grooves that didn't look like tool work. The grooves had little hooked raises along the edges, torn fibers the way wood gives when something hard stutters across it instead of slicing clean. I am not an expert in anything. I am a person who has fixed cheap furniture and opened packages with a key. Those grooves looked like they came from a hand, not a blade. There was something else, too. In the deepest groove, a tiny crescent of something paler than wood was stuck, and I thought it was a chip of shell or a fleck of plastic. I had a sudden, powerful urge not to touch it. I wrapped the splinter in a napkin from my pocket and put it in a plastic bag. I don't know why I brought the bag. Maybe I expected to pick up trash. Maybe my hands knew a story before my head did. Jenna noticed my face. "What?" she asked. "It's nothing," I said. And she gave me that look again, and then, because she loves me, let me have my lie for a minute. We ran into Mrs. Van Brunt on our way out. She walked the path like she'd invented it. She saw the bag in my hand and her mouth did something small. "You found something," she said. "I found a piece of wood," I said, and I hate how defensive I sounded. "We put earth back where it belongs," she said. "Sometimes it refuses to stay put." "Do you know where the empty casket is?" Jenna asked. "For the tour map, I mean." And she gestured toward nothing to make the lie look less like a question. Mrs. Van Brunt considered carefully. "I know where we stopped digging," she said. "I know what I was told to say in a room full of donors. And I know that names on stones do not account for all whom this ground holds to view." "Do you hear it?" I asked before I could stop my mouth. "At night. Do you hear scratching?" She looked at me with a tired kindness that made me want to go sit in a church pew 2 centuries too late. "I hear people," she said. "That is enough." On the drive home, I kept my hand in my jacket pocket on the bag with the splinter like a kid hiding candy. I wasn't sure what I planned to do with it. Throwing it out felt wrong. Keeping it felt worse. I didn't sleep well that night. Around 3, I woke from one of those dreams where your house is almost your house, but the rooms are the wrong shape. I lay there listening to the radiator click, and the neighbors argue through their bathroom vent. Jenna breathed with the nearly imperceptible whistle she gets when the air is dry. Somewhere inside the apartment there was a small, clear sound, 3 quick scratches against wood. It could have been the mice we don't have. It could have been the coat rack as it settled. That is what I made myself believe until I remembered where I had left the plastic bag and the splinter. On the bookshelf by the bedroom door. The scratch came again, slightly longer this time, followed by the softest little drag, like a fingernail catching a sliver. I got up and went to the door. The apartment was amber with the streetlight. The bag was where I left it. No movement, no shaking. I picked it up and the sound stopped, as if causality had just been waiting for me to cue it. I thought about flushing the splinter. I thought about burning it. And then I thought about how you do not destroy something if you want to believe it is ordinary. In the morning, I took it to my friend Mark, who works in a wood shop in a warehouse with a leaky roof. He looked at it with his glasses pushed up and said it was old, made of something dense like oak. He said the gouges looked like they came from something harder than wood pressed in small repeated strokes, not a chisel slip. He offered to sand a corner to see the grain. I told him to please not do anything. He looked at me and at the bag and then said he could at least remove the little pale fragment to see what it was. He used tweezers like he was handling a splinter from a toddler's palm. The sliver came free. He set it on a piece of black felt and we both leaned toward it in the watery daylight. It was a crescent. Not shell, not plastic. Mark said very softly that he thought it was a piece of a fingernail. I took it back. That afternoon, I drove alone to Sleepy Hollow and parked in the little lot by the church. I didn't text anyone. I didn't go inside. I stood by the fence and watched a group of school kids walk by with clipboards, and a teacher whose voice carried the cheer of someone who will drive home and cry from the effort of it. I waited until the path was empty, and then I walked to the place where the ground narrows. I stood there and said I was sorry. I said it out loud. I said I was sorry we pry and we poke and we name things that don't want our names. I set the splinter on the soil and used my foot to push a little dirt over it. I didn't make a ceremony. I didn't know how. The earth under my boot shifted once, just enough that I lost my balance and caught myself with a hand on the stone lid of the box tomb to my left. My palm slid across cold lichen. When I looked down, there were 3 parallel green streaks on my skin where it brushed the growth like a child had painted me. The streaks washed off with the pale dust of the plant. I stood there until a car horn on the road startled me into remembering I have a job. On the way out, I passed Mrs. Van Brunt. I didn't expect to see her, and I did not expect to speak. She nodded and said I looked tired. I said I was sorry again, and she smiled in a way that told me I had not used the wrong word. "We keep our promises here," she said. "When you stand too long, you make one, whether you meant to or not." I want to say the scratching stopped after that, but that isn't true. It doesn't follow me the way it did that night, not out loud. It happens in my head sometimes when I can't sleep. 3 and pause, a dragging exhale. When I pass a fenced lot, I quicken my step. When a subway slows in a tunnel and you can hear the walls scrape the cars, I think about air moving where earth should be and have to look at the advertising to keep my breath normal. There is one other thing. It's small and I've told only Jenna. I noticed it a week later when I picked up my boots to take them to the cobbler. The 3 slices on the sole had widened a little, as if the rubber wanted to remember them. Along one cut, pressed into the edge where the material had rolled, was a narrow line of dark grit. I dug it out with a toothpick and it came loose in a tiny ribbon, not dirt exactly. When I rubbed it between finger and thumb, it smelled the way old wood smells when you first open a trunk in a house that has been empty too long. I washed my hands in the sink for longer than necessary. The marks are still there. The cobbler said he could replace the whole sole, but I told him not to. They are my evidence. They are also the reason I don't stand still in graveyards anymore. If you go to the old Dutch church burying ground, go in the day. Wear shoes you won't mind losing. If you walk the path where the stones tighten and the fence grins at you, keep moving. If you stop, you might feel the ground give under your weight like it's rearranging itself to accept something. It could be nothing. It could be winter coming out of the soil. Or it could be a story still trying to finish the sentence it started when someone lifted a lid and saw claw marks where a person should have been. Best to keep walking. That's what I tell myself whenever the sound begins at the edge of hearing. 3 and pause, until I reach the gate in the road and the ordinary noise of cars. That's where it stops, as if the fence keeps more in than we know. I don't know what they reburied or what they didn't. I only know that some promises can't be buried at all. They follow as close as your own steps and ease only when you leave, which is another kind of mercy I don't pretend to deserve.